Homecoming, a Love at Juniper Ridge sweet romance novella by Heather Tullis. Whoever made up the rhyme about April showers didn't live in the Rockies. As she emerged from her car, Alana Jenkins yanked up the hood of her coat to protect her hair from the swirling snowflakes in the newspaper parking lot. A cold breeze blew down her neck and made her shiver. After a long winter, she always wondered why she had chosen to settle back home in Juniper Ridge instead of near a beach in California. This was no exception. Others were returning from lunch breaks, and Alana grimaced at her tardiness. Her editor, Doug Cassell, would want to know where she'd been all morning. If she hadn't left her cell phone charger at work the previous evening, she would have been able to check in with him. She greeted the editorial department's office manager, waved to the ladies in classifieds, and avoided making eye contact with Bob in advertising. Alana slid into her desk and plugged in her cell. With any luck, Doug would remember her morning's appointment. That was probably too much to hope, though. The phone on her desk rang. "Chronicle, this is Alana. How can I help you?" "So you decided to come in?" It was Doug's voice on the line. "I've been in interviews. I told you where I'd be." "Yes, but you didn't mention you were going to be incommunicado." "Sorry, my cell died. It's charging, and I'm writing the story now." She made clicking noises with her keyboard to solidify the excuse, even though it hadn't finished booting up yet. "Good. I'll expect it by day's end. I have the new head photographer in here. He's going to shoot your appointment this afternoon. Would you join us?" Alana was relieved. The newspaper's head photographer had quit without notice several weeks earlier, and the remaining two had been spread pretty thin. Alana had learned a thing or two about taking pictures when she was in college, but she was no expert. "Terrific. I'll be right there." Alana adjusted the lapels on her lavender suit jacket, finger-combed her hair to make sure it wasn't sticking out in odd directions, and tried to look confident as she walked around the cubicles to Doug's office. "Alana, how are you doing today?" Bob greeted her as she rushed around a corner and nearly knocked into him. He wore an expectant smile. She rushed past before he could try to ask her out. "Great. Busy. Doug's waiting on me." Alana waved over her shoulder at the advertising manager and shot toward the glass doors enclosing Doug's office. 2 steps into the room, her expression froze, and her last step faltered. It had been a long time since she had mistaken someone else for him, but she still had to take a second long look before she was sure. Kyle. What is he doing here? She couldn't breathe when she looked into his dark eyes, saw the rough angles of his face, and the shock of red hair she'd loved against all sense. Red hair had no right to be so sexy on a man. It was probably good she stopped breathing, since the words running through her mind were definitely not office appropriate. She had the urge to step back and protect herself, or to drive him off now while there was still time. Kyle was completely at ease, however, and smiled as if no time at all had passed since they'd seen each other instead of the years and betrayal that spanned between them. "Hey, Anna. Long time, no see?" The jerk. How could his British accent and smooth baritone still do funny things to her stomach? Doug stepped into the breach and clapped a hand on Kyle's shoulder. "I understand you know Kyle." A massive understatement, though he couldn't possibly know the whole truth. "We're very lucky he wanted to settle down for a while and was willing to come here. He said he can start this afternoon. Do me a favor and show him around." Alana's tongue started working again. "What do you mean?" Her gaze shifted from Kyle, where it had been glued, to her boss. "You can't honestly be saying he's the new head photog?" Panic rushed through her. He couldn't stay. How was she supposed to keep her secret if he stayed? Surprise. Kyle's voice was dry, but he looked amused. It didn't make sense. Kyle had been out taking photos in Tanzania or something last time she'd heard, which had been a while, admittedly, as she didn't make a habit of asking about him. His pictures were sought after by the biggest magazines, and he'd even been a major contributor to a couple coffee table books. Why would he choose to move to the middle of nowhere? "Why?" Doug answered for him. "He says he wants to spend more time with family, but you probably know all about that." Alana thought Doug was an amazingly unobservant man for a newspaper editor if he'd missed the tension in the air. "Right, of course." She stared Kyle down. He hadn't said a word about relocating, not one word, and if his father had known he was coming to town, surely he would have told her. Great, he's going with you on your assignment this afternoon. Now skedaddle, I have some calls to make. Doug circled behind his desk. Oh, and Alana, try to keep your phone charged. I'll do better. Alana's mind swam as she turned into the hallway. Her head was bursting with images of the last time she'd seen Kyle, of the sadness on his father's face when Kyle's name came up, an event which happened with less frequency as time passed. This despite the fruit of his labors always being in prominent display on the coffee table. She blinked and mentally wiped at the memories, pushing them away for now. Focus. We'll do a brief tour and I'll let you get to work. Things have been a bit out of sorts since Ben quit. She kept in the half-laugh that wanted to escape when she realized Ben quit this job to freelance, while Kyle gave up a successful freelancing career to take the position at the newspaper. I'd appreciate it. Kyle followed without pushing her for conversation as she pointed out the different departments. His easy grace and British accent charmed everyone he met, but she had to grind her teeth to keep from saying anything she shouldn't. Alana didn't meet his eye. Didn't even look his way if she could help it, as she made introductions to Carla, editor of the sports department, and Vaughn in composing. She ended at his desk. Here's your computer. If you've already had your papers processed for the job, you can probably pop over to George's office to have him set up your account. She gestured to the IT office 2 doors down. Thanks, I will. He slid his hands into the pockets of his dress pants and studied her with a familiar warmth in his eyes. Good. She picked up a paperclip from his desk and fiddled with it so she'd have something to look at besides him. My appointment with the city councilwoman and the hotelier is at 3. Meet me at 1:15. She turned and strode toward her desk. Anna! Kyle's voice was a soft protest. She ignored him and continued on, swinging by the bathroom first so she could have a private moment. Alana barricaded herself in the closest stall and squeezed her eyes shut, releasing the hot tears which had been burning to get out for the past 20 minutes. How could Kyle do this, now of all times? How could he show up as if nothing had changed? Did he expect all would be forgiven? She couldn't pretend her worry was for his father and how he would feel to have his wandering son return without notice. Mark would be thrilled, as he should be. All of her concern was for herself, her and Daniela. Last time Kyle had stayed for more than a week, he had ripped Alana's heart to shreds. Though he was her stepbrother, they hadn't been raised together, and since before she was old enough to know what hero worship was, he'd been her idol. Then they'd become friends, and her admiration had grown. And finally, after years of loving him and dreaming of an improbable future, they'd become much more than friends. In the end, he'd left and never looked back. When she felt more in control, she dabbed at her face, took a deep breath, and pushed out of the stall. Thankfully, most of the employees at the newspaper were male, so the women's bathroom was empty. Alana cleaned herself up and put on a confident, unruffled smile before returning to her desk. She still had a story to write before her interview. When she arrived at her desk, she turned on her cell phone and found she had several voicemail messages, 2 from Doug, 1 from a story contact, and 1 from her mother. She handled the first 3, then sat back to listen to her mom's message. Hey, honey, just letting you know we're having a family dinner at our place tomorrow. Don't miss it. Her mother seemed to change her mind about what she was going to say because there was a short pause. We don't get the whole family together very often. Please come. I hope your day is going smoothly. We'll eat at 6:30. Alana jabbed at the delete button and turned off the phone. Her mom hadn't mentioned Kyle in the message, which must have been deliberate as she'd mentioned the whole family. Resentment surfaced, but Alana pushed it away. It wasn't a productive emotion, and she had too much going on to waste time with it. Time passed too quickly as Alana wrote her story for the next day's paper and then revised it repeatedly. She looked up when someone stopped at her desk and found Kyle picking up her hideous frog candy dish. His lips quirked as he turned it over and studied it. So you still collect frogs? Feeling ridiculously self-conscious, Alana took it from him. Please, keep your hands off my things. I'm sorry if its emptiness offends you. I'll try to remember to buy some more candy this week. His face flashed surprise. You stock it? And would I get a scolding if I cadged a piece while stopping to discuss a shoot with you? Kyle adjusted the straps to his camera bag and threw her a charming smile, not appearing in the least offended. The candy is there to share, the dish is not. Alana read through the last 2 sentences in her article again. She tweaked the last one and changed the system status to ready to edit. She flipped her notebook closed and slipped it into her bag, then stowed her cell phone in her pocket before standing. Her hands trembled, and she called herself 100 kinds of fool for letting him get to her. I'll keep that in mind. Kyle picked up her jacket and held it for her to slide into. She allowed him to help her with it. Be civil. Be professional. It won't kill you, she told herself, and wondered if it actually could. She made a mental note to do some research. They got into her car and backed out of the parking lot. Councilwoman Terry has been working with a hotel developer to bring in a fancy 5-star resort with all of the amenities. They plan to open Labor Day weekend. It's going to bring hundreds of jobs to our area, she told him. Always good in this bad economy, but what's the story? If the hotel isn't opened yet, it must be about something else. Councilwoman Terry got the hotel chain to help fund a daycare facility that will be available for the whole community, and they'll subsidize the use for their employees. The current project manager, Blake Ballman, is joining us. They've finalized the plans for the daycare with the city and will break ground as soon as the snow stops long enough to start. Things went smoothly when they arrived at the site. The snow even stopped falling. Alana did the interview with the charismatic Ballman and councilwoman, while Kyle took dozens of pictures. She communicated with Kyle only when she had to, and they were back in the car less than an hour later. Are you even going to talk to me? Kyle asked. We've been talking. She tightened her hands on the steering wheel. Only about business. What's there to say? You've been gone. Now you're back. Just stay out of my way, okay? Alana pulled into a parking spot near the door and reached for her handle. I think there's a lot to say, actually. She shoved the door open and got out of the car, waiting for him to exit and close the door before she locked it with the button on her key fob. Anna. Alana whirled on him and splashed slush into her shoe and up her leg. She bit back a curse at the icy shock, but her response to him held extra bite. Don't call me that. You don't have the right to call me that anymore. Again, she felt the tears prick at her eyes, and she turned to the newsroom door. Kyle grabbed her arm and gave it a tug. Look, we're going to have to work together for the next year. Can't you give me a chance to explain? I'm not interested in your excuses. She pulled her arm out of his grasp, and he let her go. Alana sucked in a couple of breaths and managed to fight her emotions. When she sat at her desk again, she focused on the computer screen. She had to finish this, and then she could go. An hour at most, and she could be home with Daniela. But for now, she needed to get the story written.
Kyle watched Alana from his desk, catching an oblique angle of her face as she focused on her computer monitor. It had been too long, nearly 8 years, since they'd seen each other. Alana had been thin and willowy as a teen and young adult, but she had filled out in all the right places. Her brown hair had been straight before, but now it fell around her face in soft waves, framing her wide blue eyes and full mouth. He'd loved her mouth, dreamed of it. Watching her now, he longed to find out if it would taste of honey and peppermint the way he remembered. If her current frosty response to him was anything to go by, there was no way he would get close enough to test his memory anytime soon. Photography had always been so much easier for him than trying to puzzle out Alana, but he knew he'd given photography a whole lot more of his time and attention than he'd given her. He'd placed his career before anything, or anyone, else. If he'd done the same with their relationship, prioritized her at all beyond those few weeks they spent together, things could have been very different. His eyes fell on a picture he'd taken of Alana during the interview earlier that afternoon. The storm had broken, and the sun had been high enough for the light to still be good as it glistened off of the fresh powder. Her hair shone like mahogany, her eyes danced, and he could tell she loved her work and that there was nothing she'd rather be doing. She was a good reporter. He'd followed her career for years. It always surprised him she'd chosen to return here, to this small mountain town. She used to have such big dreams. Kyle's eyes were drawn to Alana again, and he caught her studying him for a second before she looked away. Maybe he should have warned her and the rest of the family before he came back to town, but he'd wanted to surprise them. He'd wanted to surprise her since she'd managed to be away on vacation every time he'd come to visit since their summer together. After traveling the world for years, Kyle was tired of being alone and was ready for a change. He'd been online reading her latest news stories when he'd seen the job listing. Though it was a big step down from the plum assignments he'd garnered the past few years, he jumped at the chance to come back to Juniper Ridge. He may regret his commitment before the year ended, but for now, he'd focus on what had brought him there, his family and Alana, because no matter how he twisted it, he'd never looked at her as a sister. She'd gone from a pain-in-the-neck little girl to something considerably more interesting almost overnight, and no matter how hard he'd tried, he hadn't been able to shake the thoughts of what if. Now, he was determined to see if he could rekindle the romance he'd so foolishly walked away from so many years ago.
Alana left work and headed for daycare to pick up Daniela, swearing at the tardy snowplows that hadn't reached all of the roads yet. When she arrived, Daniela was standing at the daycare window, waving eagerly as she waited for her turn to leave. Alana felt guilty for always being the last parent to pick up her child, or as close to last as to make the distinction almost meaningless most days. With a wave to Daniela after parking the car, Alana hurried up the sidewalk. When she opened the door, Daniela already had her shoes and coat on, with her backpack slung over one shoulder. "Hey there, baby. How was your day?" Alana scooped up her daughter into a quick hug. "School was fun. Mrs. Gates taught us how to make shakes, and I have new spelling words." Daniela's eager brown eyes glowed. Spelling was her best subject. Alana ran a hand down her daughter's dark, curly hair. This girl was the light of her life. No matter what heartaches she'd had to endure, Alana wouldn't give her up for anything. "I guess we'll have to buy ingredients so we can make shakes tonight. How does that sound?" "Chocolate mint?" Daniela asked. It was her favorite flavor. It had been Kyle's favorite as well. "Of course," Alana said. She turned and waved to the daycare provider and took Daniela's hand. "What do you think? Spaghetti or stir-fry for dinner?" Not that there was any question which her daughter would choose. "Sketty and shakes." "And shakes. Don't worry, I won't forget." They wandered through the market 15 minutes later, tossing things into the basket on nearly every aisle. After they picked out ice cream, Daniela ran across the aisle to the frozen pizzas. "Can we have pizza tomorrow? I'll go right home and do my math tonight without being told." She grinned hugely, trying her best to charm her mom. "Sorry, sweetie, not this time. You doing your homework without complaint would be really terrific, but tomorrow we're having dinner at Grandma's." Alana pushed back the anxiety that throbbed inside her at the reminder. Uncle Kyle's moved back to town, and we're having a dinner to celebrate. Well, everyone else would be celebrating anyway. Daniela's eyes widened in delight. Uncle Kyle will be there? Though she'd never met him. She was a big fan of Kyle's photographs and incessantly asked her grandpa about them. She owned an inexpensive digital camera already and took pictures of everything in sight, showing a good eye for composition, even at her age. "Yes, and Uncle Greg's family, too, so you'll have your cousins around to play with." Yay! Daniela danced her way through the rest of the grocery store, talking at the speed of light. Alana cooked dinner that night while overseeing Daniela's homework. They ate, read together, and went through the evening bath and bedtime routine. Alana tried not to think about Kyle, though he was always popping into her mind, haunting her as she sought a way to push him back out of her life. She knew it was impossible. They had a family dinner the next night. There was no graceful way out of it, and even if there were, she couldn't keep Kyle and Daniela apart indefinitely if he lived in town. Why did he have to come here? Why couldn't he leave well enough alone? Kyle's father, Mark, and Alana's mother, Lorna, had married when Alana was only 3. Her brother Greg and Kyle had both been 7. Though the boys had treated her with the disdain most boys held for their younger sisters, Alana had developed a crush on Kyle from day one, and it had only strengthened through her teens. Then, the summer after her freshman year of college, she and Kyle were both off from school and home in Juniper Ridge. She worked for the local nursery to save for tuition, and he had some time to kill after his internship while he waited for the right job opportunity to come around. She took him mountain bike riding along her favorite trails one afternoon, and their relationship had taken a major turn. 8 years later, she still remembered the excitement of their first kiss while they stood in the hot sunlight and the sound of birds and a nearby creek danced in the air. His cologne filled her senses, and the light touch of his hands on her arms had sent goosebumps shooting along her skin. From there on out, they were inseparable, though they were careful to hide their feelings in front of her parents. They definitely wouldn't have been left alone so much if Mark and Lorna had had any clue that there was a developing romance. Then a job opportunity came through for Kyle. Alana took him out to celebrate, and he said he loved her. They had one beautiful, perfect night together, and in the morning he took off, leaving behind a note in explanation. The few lines he'd written were wholly insufficient to ease her pain. Alana widened the crack in her daughter's doorway to check in on her. Daniela looked so much like Kyle that Alana was surprised no one seemed to have made the connection. Lorna often urged Alana to track down the father and sue for child support if he wasn't interested in parenting. But Kyle hadn't known, and Alana wasn't about to ruin the status quo. Even if he wanted visitation, she didn't know if it would be the best thing for Daniela. How would she cope with a father who only made time for her when it was convenient? If Mark hadn't noticed the physical similarities between his granddaughter and his son, would Kyle pick up on it? Alana could only hope not. He couldn't stick to anything. He was a roamer, and he wouldn't stay around for half the year before he yearned to be on the road again. She couldn't really blame him. She'd always wanted something more, to travel and see the world. Lucky for him, he had the chance. Their one night together, however, had made it impractical and unlikely that Alana would be able to do the same any time in the foreseeable future. "Mom," Daniela called out as Alana started to move back to the living room. "Yes, sweetie?" "Do you think Uncle Kyle will teach me about pictures?" She yawned hugely and snuggled under the covers more. "I don't know. He's pretty busy." Alana tried not to get her daughter's hopes up. "We don't know how long he's going to be here. He may have agreed to stay a year, but she wasn't about to hold her breath. Does Uncle Kyle have any kids? Because it would be fun to have someone to play with." Daniela's voice turned drowsy as she drifted toward sleep. What could Alana say to that? No, honey. The question had been about cousins to play with, not about herself, right? Sleep tight. I love you, Mom. I love you, too. Alana closed the door most of the way again to block out light from the hallway and moved to the living room. She was a strong, independent woman and had raised Daniela alone this long. Kyle's return to her life didn't have to change things, not really. She didn't interact that much with the photographers, and they could stay out of each other's way most of the time. Surely it wouldn't take long for the memories to calm when he was around, and for his handsome face to stop twisting her insides with all too familiar pain. She prepared for the next day, checked the locks, and then headed to her room, tears already stinging her eyes as the emotions she'd been pushing back all afternoon engulfed her. Just one night of wallowing, Alana promised herself, and she could face him tomorrow and act as though his very presence didn't turn her inside out.
3. It was 9 o'clock when Kyle pulled in front of his father's home. He hadn't been back in 2 years, and only a handful of times in the 6 previous to that. Even his calls and emails had been irregular, and Mark and Lorna had kept up their end of things far better than Kyle. He wondered now if it was because he was so busy, as he'd always claimed, or because he felt guilty for how things had ended with Alana. More than once over the years, he'd been driven to ask how she was doing, what she was up to, but the answers had always been oddly vague and unsatisfactory, considering how much he heard about Greg. The 2-story log home was nestled into the hillside, surrounded by trees and drifts of winter snow. Kyle had been in the Zimbabwe desert a week ago, working on a piece about a relief group that was bringing in irrigation to a few villages. The heat had stifled sucked the air out of his lungs, and made dehydration a serious threat. In contrast, the cold mountain air here drove through him, and he wished he'd purchased a warmer coat. He'd be glad when the weather warmed and his blood had time to thicken to deal with the climate change. Kyle's hands tightened on the steering wheel as he stared at the house. Over the past months, he had longed to be home, the only place that had ever felt like home, even though it had never really been his. The English country estate where he'd grown up just outside of London was beautiful, and his mother would love it if he returned there, but it was too cold and austere for his tastes. He wondered if Alana had called Lorna and told her about his job before he had the chance to break the news himself. He hoped they would be happy he was staying. They'd always been glad when he came to visit and frequently asked when he would be back again. Kyle got out of the car and reached into the back for his bag of photo equipment and a duffel with most of his personal belongings. Traveling more often than not, he didn't really own much. It was easier, though he did keep a small storage unit with souvenirs he'd picked up through the years. He'd already arranged for shipment and expected his things within the week. The sidewalk seemed to go on forever, but before he reached the door to the house, his father stood in the opening, wearing a smile of greeting. Kyle noticed his father's face held more wrinkles, and gray had infiltrated his auburn hair. Emotion he couldn't name welled up inside him, and he wished he hadn't stayed away so much. "Hi, Dad. How are you doing?" Kyle attempted an easy smile. "Great. It's good to see you, son," Mark said, embracing him. "How was your trip up the mountain? I never liked taking that drive at night." "My trip was fine." Later, Kyle would explain that he'd been in the area all day. No need to point out that he'd gone to work before stopping to see his father. What had he been thinking anyway? Oh yeah, Alana. "How is everything here?" "Great. Terrific. Lorna has some leftovers in the fridge if you're hungry. Turkey, potatoes, and all the trimmings." Just the thought of Lorna's cooking was enough to make Kyle salivate. "You know I can't pass up one of her meals, especially considering some of the things I've eaten lately." They shared a chuckle, and Kyle dropped his bags in the front room before following his father to the kitchen. Lorna stood at the sink looking so much like Alana that Kyle had to remind himself to breathe. Both women were so beautiful. Lorna had a wash rag in one hand and a grin on her face. "Kyle, welcome home. It's so good to see you. I hope you're staying for a long while. You were a bit cryptic when we spoke earlier." Kyle gave her a hug and brushed a curl away from her eyes. "You look fabulous, you know? And I didn't mention how long I was staying because I wanted to wait until everything was final. I had to talk to a man about a job first." He released her and leaned against the kitchen island. He tried to act casual and unconcerned, but couldn't help wondering how they would feel when he told them the whole truth. "Today, I was hired to work at the Chronicle as the new head photographer. I agreed to stay for at least a year." Their delight nearly bowled him over, making him wonder how he could possibly deserve their support when he'd been so standoffish. "You're really staying? But I thought you loved the travel," his father said. "Is something wrong? Are you sick?" Kyle chuckled. "No, nothing's wrong. I do love the travel, but I've been on the road for a long time. I'm ready to stay in one place for a while, try my hand at a normal life, and actually spend time with you." It was hard to admit, but it was why he was there. Or part of why, anyway. If he was going to make this work, he needed to be straight with them. This would be a fresh start in his relationship with his father. "I've been too far away most of my life. The occasional visits are never enough, and I guess I've been feeling disconnected. I wanted to be able to get to know you again." He'd spent so many years running, and he was only now starting to understand what demons had chased him. Mark's eyes glistened. "I'm glad. I've missed you." A tear dripped down Lorna's cheek, and she smiled as she wiped it away. "Well then, we have a room all ready for you. You probably have jet lag from the trip." "I do, thanks." His exhaustion was almost as strong as his gnawing hunger. "It's been a long day. I actually spent most of it at the newspaper organizing and meeting with people to get things back on track." "They put you to work the day you came in to interview?" Mark asked. Kyle grinned. "It was already in the bag." Doug admitted as much. The interview was more formality than anything, and a chance to discuss specifics face to face. I offered to get right to work. He'd wanted to see Alana, and knew that digging in at the office was his best bet. Getting to shoot her interview that afternoon had been an unexpected perk. "So you saw Alana?" Lorna's voice lifted at the end, giving the impression she meant much more by the question than she said. Kyle was cautious about how he answered. "Yes, I shot some pictures on an interview with her. She seems to be doing well." Lorna nodded. Yes. She manages life very well. She just never gives up." Kyle's brows furrowed as he wished he could read her better. There was definitely something she wasn't saying. "Grab your bags and follow me," she said as she headed down the hall. Kyle followed her, passing his father a grateful smile as they left the room. "Dad said something about leftovers? It's been a long time since lunch," Kyle told Lorna after he dumped his gear on the bed. "Of course. I'll reheat it for you." In the kitchen, while Lorna popped a plate of food in the microwave, Kyle walked around the room, studying the knickknacks and family photos. "How many kids does Greg have now?" "Just the two little ones." Lorna gestured toward the picture of two boys, one a toddler and one a preschooler, both with their mother's blonde hair. "So who's this girl?" Kyle pointed to a dark-haired pixie, about age 4 or 5, wearing a princess costume. The picture was far too modern to be Alana. Lorna's love was clear as her voice softened. "Daniela. She's Alana's." Kyle's head snapped to look at Lorna, and he wondered if he had heard wrong. "She has a daughter? Why didn't I know? How long?" His heart pounded at the thought of her with someone else, but he told himself he was being stupid. So she'd had other relationships. It wasn't like he'd been there to depend on, or as if he hadn't dated other women over the years. Still, the thought of her with another man, of her sharing a child with him, the jealousy formed a hard, tight ball in his gut, making him wonder if he would be able to eat after all. He got control of himself, managing to moderate his tone. Is she still seeing the father, or anyone else? He felt like an idiot for not checking out this detail before taking the job. If she was involved with someone, seeing her every day would be nothing but torture. "Not that I'm aware of, but she has a history of keeping her relationships private." The words were almost too casual, and Lorna didn't look his direction, which made Kyle wonder if she knew about him and Alana. He rubbed his chest at the ache he always felt when he thought of their time together. He often found himself drawn back to the file of photographs he'd taken that summer, especially one of Alana with laughing eyes as she emerged from the creek, water dripping off of the t-shirt and shorts she'd worn for their impromptu swim. He'd set down the camera and kissed her until the sun and hot breeze had dried their clothes enough that the bike ride home wouldn't cause chafing. "Why didn't anyone tell me about her daughter?" he asked. "I know you two were close the summer you spent here," Lorna said. "When we didn't hear from you for so long, she asked me not to discuss her with you. She always said that if you cared, you'd contact her yourself." Her voice held gentle reproof. "I should have." Kyle looked at the picture of the little girl again and felt an odd sense of longing. "I bet Alana's a great mom." "She is. Daniela's her world." Lorna brought the plate of food over and set it in front of him. She put her hand on his shoulder and gave it a quick squeeze. "I'm sure you'll have time to work things out with Alana later. Eat up." Kyle looked at the plate of food and smelled the steam coming off of it. His stomach growled, and he decided there was no point in going hungry. Alana having a child wasn't the end of the world. He liked kids, and his father had been a good dad to Greg and Alana, even though they weren't his. It just threw an extra issue into the mix that needed to be balanced. But then again, Kyle had been walking a tight wire for years.
4. At work. Alana had managed to be cool but polite to Kyle. Taking Daniela to dinner, however, knowing he would be there, Alana's heart raced, her hands sweated, and she was sure the evening was going to be a disaster. How could it be anything else? Daniela talked nonstop about seeing her cousins. She loved Greg's youngest, smothering the toddler with affection every time they were together. And Uncle Kyle will be there. I want to be a photographer like him when I grow up. He takes the prettiest pictures. I'm sure he'd like to hear that, said Alana. She had briefly thought about sending Daniela to a friend's for dinner, but dismissed it reluctantly, knowing it would be a cowardly move and ultimately futile. When she opened the front door to her family's home, the air was redolent of elk roast and vegetables. Since her father and Greg had bagged 3 elk between the various hunts the previous fall, it was almost the only red meat their family had eaten of late. Alana carried in some cookies she'd picked up at the grocery store bakery the previous evening. Kyle stood near the door when she and Daniela came in, almost as if he was waiting for them, but he only gave Alana a nod in greeting. It hadn't been long since they'd seen each other at work. "Hey, you must be Daniela. I'm Uncle Kyle. Do you mind if I call you Ella? You look like an Ella." He'd always had a thing for using nicknames. She used to find it endearing. Now, not so much. "You mean like Cinderella?" Daniela asked, wrinkling her nose. He leaned in and used a conspiratorial whisper. "You know she became a princess, yeah?" Daniela considered this, then grinned mischievously. "You can call me Princess Ella." He gave her a thumbs up. "Sounds like a deal to me. Does that make me Prince Kyle?" "No, you can't be the prince. You have to be Uncle Kyle." Those words made Alana's heart ache. She hated the pretense and lies, but how could she come out with the truth now? And if Daniela found out, how much would it hurt her when Kyle took off again? He hadn't wanted Alana, hadn't cared enough to even keep in touch. What kind of father would he make? "I like your pictures, especially the ones of the animals." Princess Ella took his hand and gave him a royal nod. "I like those too, especially the ones of the tigers. Were you scared when you took them?" Daniela led him to the sofa and began dragging out the scrapbooks of pictures and articles Mark had clipped from Kyle's publications. Kyle gave her his full attention, only looking away to flash Alana a grin. The sweet ache in Alana's chest made it hard to breathe. This was what she wanted for her daughter, a father who cared, who really paid attention. But she had to hold this secret close, because this moment was an aberration, and it wouldn't last. Alana took the cookies into the kitchen, stopping to greet her brother and his wife and hug and kiss the boys. "It's been a while since we've all been together like this, hasn't it?" Greg asked. "Quite a while. 7 years, 8 months, and 13 days, but who was counting?" Alana set down the cookies and changed the subject. "The food smells great, Mom." "She still won't share her magic dust with me," Paula said. "I swear, no matter how carefully I follow her directions, I can't get anything to turn out like she does." Lorna blushed and waved her hand. "You girls are foolish. Now set the table. We'll be eating soon." Dinner progressed uneventfully, though Alana was constantly on edge, expecting something to happen, someone to notice how much Daniela and Kyle looked alike now that they sat side by side. Daniela couldn't be pulled away from him with a crowbar. Kyle was surprisingly adept at dealing with a 6, almost 7-year-old girl, a fact which surprised and intrigued Alana. As they cleaned up the dishes afterward, Paula asked about the birthday party the next week. "Cake and ice cream at your place, right?" "Actually, Daniela has her heart set on dinner with everyone. My place is a little tight, but we can all squeeze in. I'm happy to do the main dish if you want to bring salads or whatever." They always got together for birthdays. It was a tradition she and Paula had both lobbied for when Greg and Paula returned to Juniper Ridge. "Come here instead." "Don't be silly," Lorna said. "We have plenty of room." "Are you sure? I'm happy to do it at my place." Alana was secretly relieved. Not only was space a premium at her tiny apartment, but finding time to clean with an active child wasn't always easy, even if Daniela was an angel most of the time. "Nonsense. Of course we'll meet here," Lorna concluded. "Speaking of places," Kyle said, "is there anywhere around here where I can rent an apartment pre-furnished?" Greg snorted. "Only if you want to pay resort prices. There aren't many places available for rent, period. I'll get you some names of landowners, though." "I'd appreciate it. I haven't had to worry about furnishings or dishes in a long time." Daniela came up to Kyle, wrapping her arms around his waist. "Are you coming to my party?" "You bet, Munchkin." He ruffled her hair. Talk of the birthday made Alana uncomfortable, and she decided it was time to clear out before he asked how old she was. "Come on, Daniela, you have a lot of homework to do before bed." Mom, can't we stay 5 more minutes?" Alana tapped her on the nose. "No, we need to go now. Sorry, honey." She held out Daniela's coat to help her into it. But, Mom, we're having fun. Daniela poked out her lower lip in a pout. Don't argue with your mother, Ella. You'll see your cousins again next week. Kyle walked over and picked her up once her coat was zipped. And you're going to have cake and ice cream and lots of gifts, and we're going to partay. All right? Daniela huffed in dejection. All right. Good. Now, how about if the princess lets me walk her out to the car? And next time I see you, ask me about taking pictures of giraffes in South Africa. Okay. She perked up instantly at the thought and went along with the preparations to leave without complaint. Sure, Alana muttered to herself. She's happy to do it for him. It's not every day you get to meet your idol, Greg said from her right. No, but apparently it is every day I get to work with her idol, she muttered. Yay me! Your overwhelming enthusiasm has been noted, Kyle said. Alana felt her face heat. She hadn't realized he could hear them. Without dignifying his comment with a response, she grabbed her coat from the rack. Did I mention, Kyle asked as he stepped closer, leaning in so only she could hear, that I love that blouse? You look terrific today. She was blindsided by his comment and stared at him in confusion. She knew she blushed deeply. Kyle went on as if he hadn't said a word to her. Come on, Princess Ella, your carriage awaits. He took Daniela's hand and led her out the door while she giggled wildly. He's definitely charmed her, Paula said, though who could blame her for succumbing? He does have a way with people. I think half the women at the newspaper are already in love with him, Alana muttered as she grabbed her purse and gave her mom a hug goodbye. Prosody rate 7%. Alana was about to climb into the front of the car when Kyle finished buckling Daniela's seatbelt and shut her door with a, I'll see you soon, princess. His expression turned more thoughtful as he met Alana's gaze over the hood. And I'll see you tomorrow. Alana's stomach churned, but she gave him a small wave as she finished getting into the car and closed the door. She only half listened to Daniela's prattle about Uncle Kyle on the ride home.
As he watched Alana's car disappear around a corner, Kyle thought about the evening. He'd been curious about Daniela and had intentionally focused on her as soon as she came into the house. But she had surprised him. She was so gregarious, chatty, and funny, and he had to admit that her obvious hero worship fed his ego, especially when Alana kept herself aloof. He'd decided to charm the daughter as a way to get past the mother's defenses, but found himself under her spell instead. That day at work, Alana had barely acknowledged him, but he'd watched her, recognizing the way she flipped her hair behind her ear when she was irritated and soaked up her smile when she laughed with one of the other reporters. Just the few hours he'd spent around her so far renewed his feelings for her, made him want to curse himself for being such a fool for letting her go the first time. And her daughter was so sweet, so vibrant. After all of the pain and misery he'd seen in his travels, he wanted their light in his life. He might not know much about being a father. He had lived thousands of miles away from Mark, and his stepfathers had all been disinterested at best. But he knew what it was to want someone to listen, to care, and be there when you were upset or worried. He thought he could be that person, for both Alana and Daniela. First, he had to remind Alana of the things she had once liked about him. The front door opened, and Greg came out holding a sleepy toddler in his arms, while Paula followed with their older boy trotting alongside. "What are you doing out here?" Greg asked. "Aren't you freezing? Weren't you just staying in the desert?" "Yes, and I am freezing." Kyle tucked his arms closer to his body for warmth and ambled toward the house. "But it's a nice night, isn't it? I was listening to the wind in the evergreens." He hadn't been, but he noted now that the sound was soothing. "You'll get more than enough of it from here on out," Greg promised. "Then I'll head in. I'll see you soon." "You bet." Greg passed him on his way to the car, and Kyle walked to the house. When he was in the shelter of the porch, he turned back and saw Greg put his son in the car seat, and the loving way he tousled the boy's hair before closing the car door. Kyle realized now how much he wanted that, and he was willing to do anything to get it.
5 Wednesday, Alana did her best to ignore and avoid Kyle. She had articles to write and interviews to conduct. Then he emailed her the pictures he'd taken to go with the article on the city councilwoman and included one he'd taken of her. It was far more flattering than any she'd had taken in a long time. There was a note saying that he loved it so much he thought she might like a copy. Alana did love it. She sent him a brief thanks, then tried to focus on work again. As she did a final proofread on her article, someone walked over and poured something in her frog candy dish. Peppermint Mentos. She looked up at Kyle in wonder. "You remembered?" He leaned in, his palms on her desk, his face only inches from hers as their eyes met. "I remember everything, Alana. I thought of you every time I saw frogs. The smell of vanilla still takes me back to the night we stayed up talking about our dreams. I eat peppermint Mentos and yellow curry sometimes just to feel close to you. I haven't forgotten 1 second of what it was like to be one half of us." "Then why did you leave?" The breath backed up in her chest, but she leaned against the chair and slid it away from him to get some space, to find some air that didn't surround her with his scent. "Thank you for the Mentos." Frustration showed on Kyle's face, but he straightened, slid his hand into his pocket, and nodded. "You're welcome." Alana watched him walk away, her heart beating faster than usual, until her lungs started to work again. What was she supposed to think? He really remembered all of those details? So how could he have left without giving her a way to contact him? She shook her head. It didn't make sense. Over the next few days, Alana wondered why she bothered to avoid Kyle when he continually found ways to remind her of his presence. One day he brought her a 6-pack of Dad's root beer, her favorite brand and not easy to find in their area. He didn't stay for thanks, just dropped it off with a "thought you'd like this," and returned to his desk. The next afternoon she found a small frog made of clear stone sitting beside her keyboard when she got back from lunch. She had no doubt where the frog had come from. It was so like the boy she'd known, or thought she'd known. Alana put the frog at the foot of her computer monitor, where she could see it all the time, and read the note under it. "I found this in a little shop downtown. It reminded me of our picnic by the creek, with the toad bellowing every few minutes." She felt her heart catch at the memory. It had been one of her favorites. That night, as Alana prepared dinner, Kyle showed up on her doorstep, his camera bag in tow. "Hey, is Ella around?" "Yeah." Alana dragged the answer out, not sure why he asked. Of course she would be there. Where else was her daughter supposed to be at this hour? Then she had a terrible thought. Did he know? Had he figured it out? She hoped not. After all, wouldn't he have said something? "I promised I'd swing by and show her how to use my camera," he said, peering around Alana's shoulder. "Are you going to let me in?" She couldn't really tell him no, not without looking like a shrew, and Daniela had mentioned his intended visit. "Of course." "Hey, Princess Ella, are you here?" Kyle called out. Daniela rushed into the room and right into his arms. "You came." "I said I would." He rubbed a hand down her curls. "Are you going to show me how to use your camera?" "Of course, Munchkin." He took her hand and led her over to the sofa, sitting beside her. "What do you like to take pictures of?" Daniela fell into chatter as he pulled out his camera and showed her how to use it. He talked about light and settings, all surprisingly in a way the little girl could relate to, even if she wouldn't remember all of it. While Alana stirred the soup and added home-style noodles, she listened to Daniela run to her room for her scrapbook. They pored over it as she showed off the pictures she'd taken herself. "Wow, whatever you're cooking smells terrific." Kyle stood at the edge of the counter some time later, watching Alana, surprising her. How long had he been standing there? "You wouldn't happen to have extra to share with a hungry, underpaid tutor, would you?" Amusement flared through her, though she kept her face impassive. "Is that what you are?" "Tonight, anyway." She had to look away from his searching gaze and stirred the pot one more time. She couldn't turn him down after he'd been so sweet to Daniela. If there was more to it than that, she wasn't going to admit it, even to herself. "It'll be ready soon, and you could help set the table. Bowls are in the cupboard there." He reached up and pulled out 3. "She's a great kid, so much enthusiasm." "She's a real corker, all right, keeps me on my toes." Alana smiled to herself. "Is the father around?" She turned to the fridge to pull out the bread and milk so he couldn't see her face. No, he didn't want to do the whole family scene. At least she had to assume he didn't want it. He'd rarely made an effort with his family through the years, so why would he want one now? He's really missing out. She's terrific. I think so. Alana pushed away the guilt for not telling him and focused on what she was doing. Daniela ran into the room. I put it away. Can we take pictures now? Sure, we have a few minutes. Help me set the table first. Kyle supervised the table setting and then sat on a chair and pulled Daniela to stand between his knees, her back to him, so that he could help her set the camera and pick the shot. Alana looked over to see the short lens pointed at her. Kyle's hand guided one of Daniela's to support the front under the lens, while his other held the body of the camera still as she picked the shot. A lump came to Alana's throat, and she had to look away before he caught her emotion. Seeing Daniela with Kyle was a dream come true, and him sharing an interest they had in common made it even better. He was so easy with her. Alana's guilt increased. Had she made a mistake? Would whatever time he could have spared over the years have been better than nothing? Would it have outweighed the loss Daniela would have felt every time he went away? She'd heard the shutter click several times and suspected most of the shots were of her. Alana had been a frequent subject for both photographers, so she supposed she shouldn't be surprised. The noodles had finished cooking, so she interrupted their lesson. All right, put it away. Dinner's ready. She heard them talk as Kyle showed Daniela how to stow the camera and lens properly in their bag. Then they came over to join her at the table. While they ate, Daniela asked Kyle about the places he'd been. He talked about his trips all over the world, the cities he'd seen, the animals he'd encountered, the major sporting events where he'd shot photos, stating that the Olympics was still his unreachable dream. He was a natural storyteller, and Alana couldn't help but be drawn into the conversation. When it was time for Daniela to get in the bath, Alana left Kyle in the living room and made sure her daughter had what she needed and that the water wasn't too hot. Mommy, can Uncle Kyle come again? Daniela asked as she pulled off her shirt. We'll see, sweetie. He's fun. And he let me use his camera. It's way cool. Yes, he's a good teacher, isn't he? She remembered that about him. He'd shown her how to use his camera in those weeks they'd spent together. She'd learned how to see the work through his eyes. It had been enlightening and fascinating and had given them a reason to spend hours together, which is what she had cared about most. And if he'd bothered to keep in touch, knowing how much he loved what he did would have eased some of the pain from their separation. Is he going to stay until after I finish my bath? 'Cause I have to say goodbye. I have a feeling he's not going anywhere. Alana handed her daughter the soap and left the door open partway so she could hear when Daniela was done. So, does she zonk out the second her head hits the pillow? Because she's got to wind down sometime. Kyle grinned at Alana when she came into the living room. He stood by a collection of family photos. She usually settles in pretty well, and you're one to talk. I remember Dad saying they called you the Energizer Bunny because you just kept going all day long. She ran her fingers along some picture frames, nervous about being alone with him. He crossed the room to her. I think most kids are like that, at least most of the ones I've been around. She studied him for a moment. You're really comfortable with her, as if you had spent a lot of time together. Kyle shrugged. I've photographed my share of children, which is easier if I talk with them and learn what they love. They're my favorite subjects, other than the occasional tiger. It shows. She moved to the kitchen to straighten up and found everything already spotless and the soup pot drip drying on a towel. You cleaned. You were busy. I thought you might appreciate the hand. He reached out and traced a finger down the length of her bare arm to her fingertips, his voice going low. You still have the softest skin I've ever touched. Alana shivered and moved out of his reach. She'd always been too susceptible to him and couldn't afford it now. Why did you come tonight? She's a great kid. I enjoy spending time with her, he said, then continued when she lifted her brows at him. I do enjoy her, but to be honest, I hoped it might give me an in with her mom. He reached over and touched Alana's hair, his fingers tangling in the loose curls. See, I really screwed up last time I saw her, and I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I'm hoping she'll give me a second chance. A knot tightened in Alana's chest. Kyle always knew what to say. It was part of his devastating charm. I don't think this is a good idea. You hurt me, Kyle. No one else has ever hurt me like that. I'm sorry seems so inadequate. He picked up her hand, toying with her fingers. Taking the job was the right thing for me, but I made a right cake of it. I should have talked to you before I left, and I should have kept in touch. He lifted her hand and pressed his mouth to the back of her fingers, catching her eyes and making her stomach quiver from the intensity of his gaze and the shivers his actions shot through her system. Why? So I could be even more messed up than I was? She pulled her hand away, hoping he didn't realize how shaky he had made her. I'm really glad you could go out and see the world, make a name for yourself, but I wanted to share it with you. You said... She couldn't go on. She hadn't been fully honest with him either, had she? And she didn't know if she would ever tell him. Why should she expose herself to him if he wasn't going to stick it out? Mommy? Daniela's voice cut off whatever Kyle was about to say, and Alana muttered an excuse and left the room in relief. Hey, sweetie, are you done already? She asked when she reached the bathroom. Huh. It was a record. Daniela loved her baths and usually stayed in at least half an hour. All right. Alana helped her daughter out of the bath, got her dressed, and through the evening ritual, all the time fully aware Kyle roamed the living room. She hated leaving him in there alone too long. As soon as she could, she ushered Daniela back into him for goodbyes. Can't I stay up a little longer? Daniela asked. Now, Princess Ella, you know you have school tomorrow, Kyle said, but it's not late. She looked at the clock on the DVD player. Much. Yes, it is much late, Alana said. Now say goodbye to Kyle. He probably has things he needs to do tonight. His expression said he didn't, but he didn't argue with her. He picked Daniela up for a quick squeeze. Are you coming for my birthday party next week? She asked as he put her down. Is it so soon? And you'll be 6? He asked. 7. I've been 6 all year. She set her hands on her hips as though he ought to know. First graders are 6, and I'll be in 2nd grade soon. In another 5 months, Alana said. She had to swallow the lump of worry that rose in her throat. Kyle crouched beside Daniela so their faces were on the same level. Wow, 7. You are a big girl. How could I possibly miss your birthday party? He tugged her curls. I'll see you soon, Princess Ella. Now, off to bed with you. He stood again and looked at Alana, who had been holding her breath. She thought she was going to get away with it until his expression changed and he stared at her. Was it written on her face? His fingers moved, as though he were counting, and his eyes narrowed, hardening. I'll wait here for your mom to come back out. Alana felt her heart thumping harder than ever. He knew. 6. When Alana returned to the room a few minutes later, Kyle was leaning into the sofa, but he didn't look relaxed. Sit. Why, thank you for your kind offer in my own home, Alana said, and took a spot in the love seat across from him. Don't play with me. His voice had gone frigid. It's way past time you came clean. She had the feeling that talking wasn't particularly high on his to-do list. Yelling was more likely. The whole room took on a tense air, and Alana wanted him to get in his car and drive away, but she knew he wouldn't let it drop. I have to know, he said. You have to know what? Alana asked. She wasn't going to make it easy for him. It hadn't been easy for her. Is she mine, Anna? His voice was frustrated. He fisted his hands on his knees and stared her down. How could you not tell me? I wasn't aware you cared about my life. I've always cared this, even if I have been a total Burke. Is she my daughter? When Alana didn't answer right away, Kyle stood and walked to the other end of the room, then whirled back to her. Tell me. She stared him in the eye and had the feeling her whole world was about to change. Yes, she's yours. Who else's do you think she could be? It's not like I was seeing a lot of other guys. He was the only one she'd ever been with in that way, the only one who had mattered enough. His shoulders fell, as if he were deflating. Why didn't you tell me? She stared at him, her emotions reaching a boiling point. You left me, Kyle. We slept together. We said I love you. Both of us said it. And then you left me, alone, with no contact information and no forwarding address, for 6 months. She fought to keep her voice low, worried they would disturb Daniela. You disconnected your cell phone. You told me you loved me and you never contacted me again. Even when you got in touch again, it wasn't with me. It was never with me. It was with Dad and Greg. What was I supposed to think?" He spouted some British curse words she hadn't heard since he'd gone away. "How could you not tell me?" She rested her forehead in her hands, fighting for control. When she spoke, her voice was soft. "How could you walk away from me as if I meant nothing to you? You didn't even say goodbye." His hand touched her shoulder. "Anna, no." She shifted out of his reach. "No, you don't get to be the injured party here." She stood and faced him, the righteous indignation she'd needed so badly coming to her rescue. "You told me you loved me. You held me and talked about someday when we were married, and then you said goodbye to me in a note. You forfeited your rights to me and to her." "Oh, no." He shook his head. "What I did to you was terrible and cowardly and stupid, and I've regretted it every day. But you do not get to deny me my daughter because your feelings were hurt. What about Daniela, Anna? Doesn't she deserve to know the truth?" "Why? So you can come and go in her life, showing up when it's convenient, taking a phone call if you feel like it, getting back to her weeks later when you have nothing better to do. At least this way she's known her father didn't know about her, so she couldn't blame herself for his absence. She doesn't have to wonder why he doesn't care enough to stick around." Alana was fighting dirty now, deliberately using Kyle's own feelings about his father's absence against him. She jabbed him in the shoulder. "I've known you for years, Kyle. I know you don't stick. Not with people. You like your life of jetting around, seeing the world. Don't tell me you would have given it up for her. You're too wrapped up in your own life to give anything permanent to anyone else. You don't even have a permanent mailbox to send cards to. Staying here, working at this small paper for a whole year, taking pictures of small-town events and high school games is going to get awfully boring for you." She jabbed him in the chest again. "You won't last a year." Kyle stood in silence, hurt on his face as she slapped him with a cold dose of reality. Unable to look at him without crying, Alana turned and headed for the kitchen. She lost her stride when he spoke again, louder so she could hear. "She's my daughter, Anna, and if you don't tell her, soon I will." Alana continued into the kitchen out of his sight and grabbed the edge of the counter. A moment later, she heard the front door open and close as he left. She bowed her head and wept.
Kyle drove home in a daze, unable to process what he'd learned. He was a father, and he'd never known it. Alana hadn't told him. Okay, so he hadn't been within reach for the first 6 months of the pregnancy. He'd needed time to get his head straightened out. He'd been afraid that if she'd asked him to come back, he would have, and he wouldn't have accomplished anything important with his life. At the time, he'd thought his career had to come first. He'd been sure if he stayed that he would grow to hate her, and she would start to hate him, and it would end as spectacularly as all of his mother's failed relationships. He parked his car at his dad's and got out, walking slowly toward the front door. But that was no reason for her not to tell him about his daughter. It wasn't like she hadn't been able to reach him. Over 7 years had passed since he'd gotten back in touch with his dad, a man who was really more her father than his, even though the shared biology was all Kyle's. Mark had never been around when Kyle needed him. It hadn't been his choice. Kyle's mother moving him to another country was more to blame, but that didn't change the fact that Mark hadn't been there. Kyle couldn't imagine doing the same thing to his own child. She deserved better. Kyle entered the house, glad he didn't come across anyone in the front room or the kitchen. He didn't think he could face anyone right now. He got some water from the tap and stood at the window, looking out at the moon-gilded snow mounds, and wondered if it was possible to fit together the mismatched pieces of his life. Footsteps padded into the room. "You've been at Alana's all this time?" Lorna asked. "Yeah." "Is everything all right?" She touched his shoulder. Kyle turned to face her, desperate for a sounding board and to confirm how much Lorna knew. She must have been so scared, alone, and I wasn't here for her. I didn't even think about possible consequences of us being together, which was totally stupid of me. When her brows lifted in question, Kyle clarified, "Daniela's my daughter." Understanding filled Lorna's face, proving Kyle's suspicions that she had known the truth all along. Alana wasn't alone. Well, not after she told us about her pregnancy. The corner of her mouth quirked. But it was totally stupid not to think about what could happen. I never thought. I had no idea. She never said. He felt his hands shaking, so he stuffed them in his pockets, then realized he was still wearing his coat, so he shucked it off. No, she didn't say. She didn't even tell us Daniela was yours. Lorna chuckled lightly. In point of fact, she still hasn't admitted it. Do I take it she told you? I guessed, and she confirmed it. Kyle hunched his shoulders. So when did you know? Not for a long time. Not even when she told us about the pregnancy. You two kept your relationship pretty hush. Even with clues and some basic math, I thought it was a long shot. She gave him a dirty look. The day after she told us about her pregnancy, she didn't ask if we'd heard from you, as she had so many times since you disappeared. Instead, she said if you contacted us, we weren't to tell you anything about her, except that she was fine. If you wanted more, she reasoned, you'd ask her yourself. The silence stretched as Kyle swallowed back the bile in his mouth. His inner battle still raged between indignation that she had never told him and disgust with himself for leaving her with no way to reach him in those first frantic months when she must have been terrified. I couldn't be completely sure who Daniela's father was, Lorna said, but sometimes I catch her smile, and it's just like yours. A deer stepped from the trees onto the back lawn, head held high, sniffing the air for danger. Lorna watched it with Kyle, letting the quiet settle around them before she continued. You never contacted her, she said, and you only asked about her obliquely. No, I never wrote her or called. He bunched his fist and called himself an idiot for the 1,000th time. I was afraid if I contacted her, she'd ask me to come home, and I would. The first year, the only way I could stay away was by telling myself it was better for her. And then, when I was sure I'd be strong enough to do what was best for both of us, it had been too long since I left. She'd be a fool to forgive me. And now you're here, and you got more than you bargained for. Lorna reached out and touched his cheek. The question is, what are you going to do about it? Kyle didn't have an answer. He was still in shock, but Lorna filled the silence. She was never the same after you left, though I didn't know what was really between you. Please tread carefully this time. This is my little girl and granddaughter we're talking about. I don't want to see them hurt again. Guilt multiplied as Kyle heard the censure in her voice. I'll be careful. I don't want to hurt them. He felt the promise all the way to his toes. Neither of them said anything more for a long while. Finally, Lorna turned and headed back toward her bedroom. Turn off the lights when you go upstairs. Yeah. Kyle listened to her move away, then called out, Lorna. The movement stopped. Yes? He turned to face her. You should hate me for what I did to your daughter. Why are you so nice to me? She studied him for a moment. Mark isn't the only one who can love stepchildren, and you didn't make the only mistakes in the relationship. A smile teased her mouth. Good night, Kyle. Kyle watched her go, then turned back to the deer, which was eating a patch of grass under the pine tree where there was no snow. The flame of anger burned inside of him that Alana had kept Daniela a secret, but it was little more than a candle flame compared to his guilt for leaving her to cope without him. As the buck leaped away into the trees, Kyle made a decision. He couldn't expect Alana to forgive him for his behavior if he wasn't willing to let go of his anger. He hadn't exactly given her a reason to believe in him. It wasn't going to be easy, but he knew where holding on to his anger would get him. Nowhere. Daniela was one more reason for him to dig in and make things work with Alana, and he needed to keep that goal in view. His life had been spent going after his goals with gusto and never backing away, no matter what came up. The stakes had never been so high before, but making things right with Alana was not a gamble he was prepared to lose.
7. After the way things had gone the previous evening, Alana wasn't sure what to expect when she saw Kyle at work. He was out most of the morning, which made it easier to focus, though knowing he could walk in the door at any time had her on edge. She went to lunch and returned to find a big ceramic frog with a new plastic kitchen scrubby in its mouth. There was a note. I'm a helpful froggy. I do dishes. You certainly do, she muttered to herself. remembering Kyle had cleaned up while she was putting Daniela to bed. She couldn't help but appreciate the gesture, despite her confusion and reservations. When he did come in, he smiled his greetings from across the room, then fell into his work. There was a definite lack of animosity in his behavior, something she hadn't expected. It both intrigued and confused her. The weekend brought another 8 inches of snow, and wrapped in her fuzzy robe just after breakfast, Alana was surprised to find Kyle at the door, wearing full winter gear. Hi? She managed to stop herself from touching her hair and adjusting the robe's lapels. She didn't want him seeing her like this. Didn't the man know what a phone was? His gaze flitted over her, but he didn't comment about her appearance. Hi, I wondered if Princess Ella could join me to make a snowman in the yard. It's been a long time since I've been around snow. Alana wanted to say no, to tell him to go away, but she knew that wouldn't be fair to either of them. So despite her misgivings, Alana bundled Daniela, found her own snow gear, and joined them in the fun. The snowman was enormous, and the snow angels they made in the backyard looked like a little family with the child in the middle, until Daniela chased Kyle around and threw them, holding a snowball at the ready and shrieking with glee. Alana was just as glad to have that image erased from the yard. The last thing she needed was to be reminded of the family they could have been. Might have been under different circumstances. Instead, she enjoyed watching Kyle interact with his daughter, and the light that came into her eyes. Afterward, they came inside and had cookies and hot cocoa at the table, while their clothes dripped dirty snow water onto the kitchen floor. We should do this every day, Daniela suggested. It wouldn't be nearly as much fun if we did it every day, Kyle pointed out. Besides, it's going to be spring soon, and there won't be any more snow. Then we can go for bike rides. Do you have a bike? Daniela asked, and they were off on a discussion of her favorite biking trails and how far she wanted to go this year. When Kyle finally left mid-afternoon, Alana found a tiny jade frog nestled between the photographs of Daniela that ranged along the top of the sofa table. It came with a card. I bought this in Bangkok 3 years ago. I was there during monsoon season and decided to shelter from the storm in some shops. I saw it and couldn't help but think of you. Alana stared at the gift, picking it up to run her fingers over the cool stone. He'd really been thinking of her when he was in Bangkok. Birthday parties with the family were invariably noisy, filled with food and presents and tons of confusion. This was no exception. Greg's eldest ran circles around the living room furniture, making Indian calls, while his brother wailed in protest. Kyle and Greg had a rousing debate about who was going to make it to the Final Four in college basketball. And Daniela walked around the room holding her scepter and wearing the matching crown Kyle had given her, bestowing wishes on people like a fairy godmother princess. It was one of the best parties on record, as far as Alana was concerned. So, have you started looking for a place? Greg asked when the kids were busy stuffing their faces with cake and ice cream. You were right about rental possibilities, Kyle admitted. I'm still looking at my options. I'm hoping something will come through soon. We're in no hurry to get rid of you, son, Mark said. Kyle smiled. It's been nice spending time with you, but all the same, eventually I'd wear out my welcome, so I'll keep looking. How are things going at work? You two see a lot of each other? Greg asked. Not so much. We're both very busy. Alana jumped into the conversation. Things are going well. The guys are putting out some really good work and meeting their deadlines, which makes me happy. Alana rarely needs someone to take pictures for her stories, though. I think we need to do something about that. Kyle winked at her. Very funny. But the look he gave Alana didn't make her want to laugh. It made a flush rise to her cheeks instead. So, Alana, Bob said, hanging out at her desk. He'd wandered over from the advertising department more than 15 minutes earlier, and she hadn't been able to dislodge him. Even when a phone call had come in for her, he'd hung around until she'd finished making arrangements for her interview. The high school is doing Brigadoon this weekend. Have you thought about going? I'm free tomorrow night, and I'd be happy to take you. Well, you know how hard it can be to get a sitter, Alana improvised, thinking she really did need to make it clear she wasn't interested in him at all. preferably without hurting his feelings. Was such a thing possible, or was it wishful thinking? "I'd be happy to watch Ella for you sometime," Kyle said from behind her, making her jump slightly in surprise. "Of course, tomorrow night we've got that dinner thing, so neither of us is available." "Right, the dinner thing." Alana latched onto the excuse, even though there was no such activity planned. "Sorry, Bob, but you should still go to the musical. It's a fun one." "Right?" He looked between them. "Did I hear you two are like brother and sister?" "Step-siblings, actually, but it's a whole family dinner deal. You know how it is," Kyle said, picking up the pink crystal frog Alana had found on her desk with another note the previous day. "Oh, well, maybe next time." Bob looked self-conscious as he hurried away. "So, you and Bob?" Kyle asked when the aforementioned man was out of earshot. "I never would have pictured you with him." Alana reached up and took away the frog. "There is no me and Bob. He tries to ask me out every few weeks. I usually manage to avoid letting him get the whole question out. And what family dinner thing? He's more boring than that piece of rock." Kyle gestured to the pink frog. "Your objection is noted. What family dinner thing?" "I heard about a Thai place down the mountain. They have curry. I thought you, me, and Ella make a family, right?" She lifted her brows at him. "You're reaching." He shrugged. "It's not much of a reach. So, do I have any choice in the matter?" She tried to act annoyed, but found herself enjoying the verbal sparring. No matter how hard she worked at it, she couldn't quite manage to be angry with him when he flashed her that half-smile. "Of course, it's not like I'm going to tie you up and drag you out to eat." Kyle reached over and flipped some hair out of her eyes. "Have you told her yet?" "No, not yet." Alana shivered as his finger trailed down her wrist and the back of her hand. Tomorrow night would be a perfect chance to talk to her, together. The breath seized in her lungs and she shook her head. "No, I'll do it myself when I'm sure the time is right." Impatience leaked into Kyle's voice. "When is the time going to be right, Alana? I've already missed out on 7 years with her. I want her to know who I am." Anxiety filled her. "She's not ready yet." "No, she's more than ready. You're not ready." He leaned forward and met her gaze. "What are you waiting for?" The simple answer was, she kept waiting to see if he was really going to stick. She didn't believe he would stay, and she didn't want Daniela's heart to break as her own had. Then she realized that, either way, it was probably too late. Both of them were going to hurt when he disappeared again, and whether he left or stayed, Daniela's paternity wasn't going to change, so the truth would have to come out. But not yet. Kyle held her gaze for a long moment. "She deserves to know," he said, and then moved back to his desk. 8. Despite Alana's half-hearted protestations, she and Daniela accompanied Kyle down the mountain the next evening. Eating out with him was every bit as interesting as Alana had remembered. He kept up a steady stream of chatter with both of his ladies. When Daniela got too exuberant in the restaurant, he reminded her that princesses have to be careful to always act like royalty and be a good example, which had her falling right into line. At least for a few minutes. Alana wondered how long that particular trick would work. With any luck, her daughter would stay in this princess phase for a good long while. Daniela fell asleep on the way home, so Kyle carried her into her room, and they put her right to bed in her day clothes, minus the shoes. Alana pulled the door mostly closed and joined Kyle in the living room. "You didn't push the issue of telling her tonight," she said when the quiet started to unnerve her. "I thought you would." He walked over, his hands in his pants pockets. "I'm not going to be patient much longer. I want her to know. I want to be able to claim my daughter in public." She couldn't deny him that. She didn't have the right. But she couldn't stand to see Daniela hurt. "And what happens when your year here is up and you get a terrific offer to shoot official photos for some major event? What if your wanderlust grows so big you can't stand our little town anymore, even before the year ends? I don't want her hurt, Kyle. Please don't hurt her." Kyle took Alana in his arms, pulling her close and setting his chin on her head. He didn't react to the way she stiffened. "I'm not going to hurt her," he reassured. "She's already so important to me. I never knew I could feel this way for anyone." Tears dripped from Alana's cheeks and she tried to swipe at her face. She could feel herself softening in his arms, though she didn't want to give in. Are you crying? He ran his thumbs over her damp cheeks. Hey, none of that, I'm here. She swallowed so she could speak. For now. Kyle led her over to the sofa and pulled her down beside him. I can't promise I'll never get an opportunity that tempts me, but I'm not going to disappear again. I have too much to lose now. So he didn't feel like he had much to lose the first time. Nothing important enough to make an effort for, anyway. She tried to be glad Daniela made him think twice, but it didn't help her pride much. I hope that's true, because if you break her heart, I'm not going to be nearly so forgiving. She's not the reason I came back here, you know? He leaned in and touched the side of her neck. Alana sensed the kiss coming and moved away, too raw, from his previous comment to give in. You're not as charming as you think. His laugh was self-deprecatory, though disappointment lingered in his eyes. That's okay. I have nothing but time to convince you I'm serious. Don't hold your breath, though she would have to hold hers if she didn't want his light cologne to cloud her mind. I ought to go. He stood abruptly and grabbed his coat off the back of the sofa, shrugging into it. Alana knew she had upset him, but looked at the clock and feigned shock. Yeah, it's getting late. It's 9 o'clock already? His lips curved. We're such old fogies. He reached out and tugged on one of Alana's curls. Of course, I could be convinced to stay longer if you asked me to. Tempting. No. Alana moved away. He couldn't stay when they were alone. She was too confused and way too susceptible. She followed Kyle to the door and watched him walk out to his car. With a lurch in her stomach, she realized she had never stopped loving him, and she probably never would. But she still didn't know if she could ever fully forgive him for leaving her. When do you take your lunch? Kyle asked as he set a small china frog on Alana's desk beside the keyboard. She felt her heart lurch, as it so often did when he surprised her. It was the first time he'd openly given her one of his souvenirs, and he handed her the card as if it were no more important than a sales circular. She hadn't acknowledged the previous gifts, so maybe he was looking for a response, forcing her to thank him. This time the card read, "It was Christmas time, and I found this in a shop in Hangzhou, China. The frog was delicate and sweet, and I couldn't help but get it for you." Alana tucked the card into her side drawer with the stack of others he'd given her. She picked the frog up and studied it, admiring the craftsmanship, the delicate china and elaborate painting on the side, then met Kyle's eyes. "Thank you. It's beautiful. They all are. I know I haven't said so." He grinned, making her mouth go dry and her heart rate increase. "I wanted you to know I didn't walk away and forget about you. You were always on my mind. I hope you'll let me talk to you about what happened sometime." She dropped her eyes to the frog again and set it in the philodendron plant that decorated her desk, making it peek out at them. "I appreciate it. And I might be ready to hear your explanation soon." "Good." His whole demeanor changed to one of enthusiasm. "So about your lunch break, I have something I want to show you." "What?" "It's a surprise. A good one, I hope." Alana studied him for a moment before curiosity got the better of her. She nodded. "I should be ready to leave around noon." "Perfect. I'll swing by for you." The surprise apparently involved picking up some sandwiches he had pre-ordered for their lunch. Then they took a winding drive past the new resort to a brick and stone home, surrounded by a snow-covered yard and woods not far behind. One corner had a round turret window, giving the house the feel of a castle. "Why did you bring me here?" Alana asked. Kyle pulled a key out of his pocket and showed it to her. "I signed a contract on this place yesterday. We should close in a few weeks." Alana stared at him in disbelief. "You bought a house? I thought you were looking for an apartment." A house meant permanence, dedication, of a sort, anyway. Kyle rubbed his finger down the place where her brow furrowed, an old habit of his. "If you hold that expression long enough, it'll stick. Didn't your mom ever tell you?" Her stomach fluttered, and she fought to keep her composure. "No, but I recall you mentioning it once or twice. You should try listening to me once in a while." He hopped out of the car and came around to her side, helping her out. He then took her hand and led her toward the front door. "I'm going to rent the place from the current owners until we sign the closing documents. Lucky for me, they moved away months ago and are anxious to unload it as soon as possible." She still couldn't quite wrap her mind around it. "You bought a house, but it's so settled?" permanent? They took the 2 steps to the large front porch, and he turned to face her. Whatever else happens, I have a daughter now, Anna, and I want to be here for her. Even if I do more freelance work down the road, I want this to be my home base. She deserves a dad who'll be there for her, something I didn't have. Alana immediately leaped to defend Mark. It wasn't his fault. Kyle touched her lips with his fingertip, silencing her. No, it wasn't his fault, but it doesn't change things. I needed him, Anna, and he was too far away. I'm not letting that happen to my daughter. He brushed the hair out of her face, trailing his fingertips across her cheek. I'd like to be there for her mother, too. His fingers followed her jawline and tipped her face up to his. You're the one I came back here for. I don't want you to think this is only about Ella. His husky voice was full of promise, and she took a step away from him, feeling her heart race. I'll keep that in mind. Disappointment tightened Kyle's face, but he didn't say anything. Instead, he turned to the door and opened it, ushering her inside. The rooms were bright and airy, flowing from one to the next, with tall ceilings and enormous windows that faced south. They headed up the stairs. This is the perfect room for a princess. Kyle gestured to the door at the top of the stairs. Alana pushed it open and gasped in delight at the bubblegum pink walls and deep carpeting, and there was a padded seat in the turret window. In her mind's eye, she could see a 4-poster princess bed with flowing sheer curtains on each corner and plump pillows. Daniela would love it. It's perfect. It will be perfect. Good. I want it to be. She turned to see Kyle, but he wasn't looking at the room. He was looking at her. It made her break out in goosebumps. Let's see the rest, she said. The master bedroom was spacious, featuring big windows and a huge bath with a garden tub and multiple shower heads above it. There was a 3rd bedroom and a 2nd bath on that floor. Downstairs, he showed her another room the right size for an office next to the kitchen. This will be perfect for my desk and computer so I can touch up my photographs. There's room for another desk in here as well, if someone else needed somewhere to work. He sent her a pointed look. She couldn't help but smile. You're not very subtle. I wasn't trying to be. He pulled her away from the office door and into the kitchen, opening the bag of sandwiches he'd picked up earlier. Let's eat. You have a lot of furniture to buy. The place practically echoed with emptiness, and Alana wondered if he had any idea how much everything would cost. Then she remembered the inheritance his grandfather had left him and decided he probably wasn't overly concerned about money. Kyle handed her one of the sandwiches and a small bag of baked Lays, her favorite. Yes, I was hoping I might enlist you and Ella in that project. Alana shifted further away from him. She'll get bored long before you're half done, but I'm sure she'd enjoy helping to pick out her bedroom furniture. The thought of her little girl spending the night here made her heart ache, not because she didn't trust Kyle, but because she'd never spent a night away from her daughter. After we tell her I'm her dad. That was something Alana was still trying to put off, but she knew she couldn't for much longer. Of course. And I need to pick out furnishings soon, so I thought maybe this weekend we could go for a look. Alana's chest tightened at the thought, which means I have 3 days to tell her the truth. I could come over and we could tell her together, Kyle offered. In fact, I'd really prefer it. I know you're worried about how she'll react, but she doesn't seem to hate me too much. He took a bite of his meatball sub and wiped his mouth with a napkin, but didn't take his eyes off her. Haha, you know she's going to be happy about it, even if it confuses her at first. She loves you. And why did Alana resent that? It wasn't as if she wanted Daniela to dislike her father. He reached out and squeezed her forearm in a gentle, comforting gesture. She's been yours. All yours for 7 years, and now you're going to have to share her. I know it won't be easy, but it's important to me. Alana checked her watch and weighed her next words carefully. We don't have time to get into everything now, but we should tell her tonight and get it over with so it's not hanging over my head. She swallowed down the lump of emotions rising in her throat. That sounds great, Kyle beamed at having won. I'll bring something to eat. 6 o'clock work for you? Procent 9. When Kyle said he was bringing dinner, Alana had assumed he was bringing something pre-cooked and ready to set on the table, so she was surprised when dinner was an uncooked lasagna from the grocery store deli, a loaf of French bread, and a bag of salad greens. She turned on the oven and began moving around the kitchen, preparing the garlic bread, while Kyle sat with Daniela in the living room and helped her with her homework. Alana was conflicted about his presence, both appreciating the way he treated Daniela and trying not to resent that he was insinuating himself into their lives. It wasn't always easy, and with her nerves on edge about their revelation that night, it was probably just as well she could retreat inside herself. Alana set the table and chopped some tomatoes, red peppers, and other ingredients to dress up the salad greens. Daniela was cross today, and doing her math homework only made her crosser. She was terrific at reading and spelling, but numbers eluded her. Kyle was patient, however, and made a game out of her assignment, which seemed to make it bearable. Alana loved listening to them together and seeing how sweet he was with their daughter. Homework was soon finished, dinner was delicious, and Alana got Daniela through her bath and bedtime routine. Then brought her back to the living room. "Hey, Princess Ella, we have something to talk to you about," Kyle said as he patted the sofa next to him. Alana put a hand to her stomach, feeling as if a hamster were doing flips. How would Daniela respond when she knew the truth? Daniela looked between them and her eyes danced. "Are you going to marry my mom and become my daddy?" "What?" Alana nearly choked on her gum. "No!" She blocked out the image that brought to mind. Its promise was sweet seduction, but was almost certainly a lie. "And yes," Kyle said, "but not quite the way you think. See, I don't have to marry your mom to be your daddy." He took her tiny hand in his. "I already am your daddy." Daniela's brow furrowed. "But my daddy doesn't know about me. Mom said he went far away and never came back." Kyle looked at Alana for a long moment. "I did go away. I was scared and worried, and I wasn't ready to be a grown-up yet." He shifted his gaze to Daniela again. "I'm really sorry about that. I know it's been hard on your mom, even though she loves you so much, and I missed so many fun things with you and seeing you grow up and become so big. But I'm ready now, and I hope you want me to be your daddy." Daniela's grin was huge as she threw her arms around his neck. "I want you to be my dad." He held her close, and tears glistened in his eyes. "I'm so glad." Alana couldn't help but be warmed by the sight of them embracing, by such raw emotion openly displayed on Kyle's face for their daughter. Anxiety was still eating away at her, doubt that Kyle would live up to what he was saying and stay, and yet at the same time, she wanted to believe it all. Daniela was really too wired to go to bed after the announcement, and Alana wondered if they wouldn't have been better off telling her earlier instead of waiting until bedtime, but knew the whole evening would have been crazy, and the homework definitely would not have gotten done. When they finally got her settled down and Kyle had read Daniela a bedtime story, he joined Alana in the living room again. "Would you like some tea?" she asked. If it had been anyone else, she would have offered coffee, but he had taught her the finer points of tea that long ago summer, so she kept several blends in her cupboard for cold winter nights, and had added his favorite when it became clear he wouldn't stay away. "Orange pekoe, if you don't mind. I noticed you had some." She nodded and put the teapot on to heat. The act of preparing the beverage calmed her, giving her a moment to center herself before she faced him again. She was going to ask him to explain, as he'd offered to do the previous week. She still wasn't sure she was ready to hear his answers. Kyle waited on the sofa when she came in, carrying a tray with the tea and a plate of cookies. "You look ready for a long talk," he said. He ran a hand through his red locks and leaned back. "I'm really nervous," she admitted. "Why? Are you more afraid you won't accept what I have to say, or that you will?" Alana couldn't look at him because she didn't know the answer. Which would be worse? "I don't know." She handed him the cup, then sat across from him and took her own cup. Resolve settled in her stomach as she looked up to finally meet his gaze. "Lay it on me." Why did you leave? I mean, I know you had an incredible offer, and throwing it away would have been a mistake, but it didn't have to end like that." He blew on his tea and took a sip, then held it cradled in his hands. "First, you've met my mother. I love her, I do, but she has terrible taste in men. His face twisted into a grimace. I mean, Dad is great, but there's such a mismatch. Even I can see it. All of her relationships have ended spectacularly bad, and the men in her life have been legion. Right, and your mom has what to do with us? Kyle set down his cup and took Alana's hand, rubbing his thumb across her knuckles. She was headed toward divorce, with husband number 5 that summer. I'd spent a couple of weeks with her before coming here to see all of you. I heard the fights and knew it was only a matter of time. She'd had 2 aborted engagements in addition to the husband's, and watching her, I'd always figured marriage wasn't worth it. I didn't tell you, but I'd never even had a steady girlfriend until you, not one I was actually serious about. Why go through all of the heartache and stress when it was easy enough to find a date when I needed one? He turned Alana's palm over and rubbed his thumb down the center, making her shiver. But then I got to know you, and you were so different. Special. We could laugh together, talk for hours, argue without getting mad. I felt at home with you in a way I didn't with anyone else, not even my parents. He held her gaze, and his voice dropped into a smoky register. We had one amazing night together, and it was everything I wanted, and then my mom called the next day, and I told her about us and how much I loved you. She said I was making a huge mistake, that we wouldn't last a year, and that we'd destroy our lives. It terrified me. He blew out a long breath, as if trying to keep his emotions under control. Alana's senses were standing at attention as she listened, returning his steady gaze. She always knew just the right buttons to push. We were both so young, and I worried that if I stayed with you, I'd be giving up everything I'd dreamed of, hoped for. And you had dreams of your own and so much school left. I was afraid to ruin everything. I'd told you about the job offer. I knew I was going to take it. I had to. And I was so tied up inside about how we would ever manage to make it work, even before I talked to her. So you turned tail and ran. Alana's chest felt hollow. He'd cared, but not enough. A flash of anger accompanied her pain, but she tamped it down. She needed to hear the rest. Kyle reached up with his free hand and brushed the hair out of her face. After I left, I knew I'd been stupid, that I'd made a mistake in not facing you. But I was so afraid you'd try to convince me to stay, and I would have, even knowing it was a mistake, because I loved you. Alana glanced away, unable to look at him while she tried to keep her emotions under control, and there were so many feelings, all mixed up and playing leapfrog in her head and heart. You don't think I would have supported your dreams? I still had college classes. You had ambitions and a boatload of talent. I wouldn't have liked being apart, but I understood how important it was to you. I never figured you'd make a home here, right? But I thought we might travel together when I finished school. Make a team. I'm a writer. You're a photographer. We'd be unbeatable. She looked back at him. But you didn't believe in us. Kyle's gaze was too steady now, too fixated on her. Alana folded her arms in front of her and wrapped them around her torso to hold in the pain. I felt like you used me and walked away. And worse, we didn't know how you were, if you were all right. Do you have any idea how much we all worried about you? Especially me. I kept telling myself something must have happened, something bad if you didn't contact us. Then Dad finally called your mom and she said you were fine. You just couldn't be bothered to let us know. Oh, Anna, I didn't mean it like that. He grabbed her hand and gave it a squeeze. At the time, it didn't even occur to me you might feel that way. I wasn't ready to be a man, like you said. I'd seen too many broken relationships, and I was sure I would screw up everything. Alana had to laugh at the irony. Congratulations, you succeeded. Running away has a tendency to destroy things. He nodded. I deserve that, but I want to move past it. He saw her raised brow. Look, I'm here now. I'm not going anywhere. I intended to stay before I found out about Ella, and now that I know about her, there's no chance I'd walk away again. Really? Because commitment to a child doesn't scare you? You're totally prepared for parenthood? She liberated her hand from his, trying to shield herself from the influence of his touch, though his presence practically filled the room. Kyle snorted. Are you kidding? Is anyone ever really ready to be a parent? I know I'm going to make mistakes, it's inevitable. But losing you taught me a few things, including the fact that if you don't try, you fail by default. She considered his words, staring at her hands. I hope you mean it, because there's a little girl who's counting on you now. He dipped his head, and she lifted her gaze to his. I'd hoped her mother might come to count on me too. Of course, it might be nice to have a weekend off now and then. That was only half true. Alana had no idea how she would manage a weekend without her daughter, though having another person to count on would be good. Her parents helped out, but she felt guilty asking them to step in often. Daniela wasn't their responsibility. Kyle shook his head slowly, not dropping eye contact. No way am I settling for an occasional weekend. I want to have her with me as often as we can arrange, half the time if you and I can figure it out. He saw her open her mouth to protest and held up his hand. Not right away, of course. Daniela and I need more time to get to know each other, and I want to make sure you feel comfortable with me taking her alone. There's a lot I need to learn about her, and about parenting before I have her to myself overnight. His admission made Alana feel a little better. She could handle a slow transition, even if it killed her. Kyle leaned closer to her, rubbing his thumb over her lips. Of course, if you could ever see your way to forgive me and let me have another chance, we might not have to split custody. Alana pressed her lips together as they tingled from his touch. I don't know if I can. But she wanted it, wanted the whole package. She just had to decide if she could trust him. Try. He lifted her chin with one finger and slowly lowered his face to hers. I've been dreaming of kissing you again for almost 8 years. Being so close to you has been maddening. The last of his words were whispered, his mouth only millimeters from hers. He didn't make contact, as if wanting to make sure she was okay with it. His breath feathered over her lips and along her neck, making goosebumps rise. Alana's objections grew fuzzy and her lips tingled in anticipation. She thought she'd go crazy if he didn't close the gap and kiss her already, and the tension between them wound tighter. Then she touched her lips to his, and everything around them disappeared. The kiss was brief, just a tantalizing promise of what could come, and it had her longing for more. Try to think about that, he said, when you're weighing whether to give me another chance. She nodded, unable to formulate actual words. I ought to go. Kyle pulled away and studied her with his dark eyes. He took another sip of tea and left the half-filled cup sitting on the coffee table when he rose. Neither of them had touched the cookies. I guess I'll see you at work tomorrow, she said as she rose with him, feeling awkward. Yes, I'm shooting your interview. She swallowed hard at the idea of him going with her, and her feelings on the subject were significantly different than they had been a few weeks earlier. Right. See you then. Alana watched from the living room window as he pulled out of the parking lot and drove off. Would he really stay? Was he capable of settling down? She ran her fingertips over her lips and thought again of his words. She didn't know if his reasons were enough. The pain he'd caused her, before she knew she was pregnant, never mind after, wasn't something she could easily dismiss. If Kyle was really sticking around, she guessed she would have time to see what happened. 10 Daddy Kyle said we're going to buy me a princess bed, Daniela said as she bounced around the kitchen Saturday morning. She had gotten herself out of bed, picked out clothes, and dressed in clashing prints before bounding into Alana's room to wake her at 6:58 a.m. Alana would have liked to sleep longer, but it wasn't going to happen, so she'd arisen and gone to the kitchen to make her special Saturday pancakes. That's what he said. I hope we can find you one. Alana tried not to remember that the bed would only be used if her daughter spent the night away from her. Kyle's words about easing into overnight stays echoed in Alana's head, reassuring her. Oh, he'll find one. That's what daddies do. Daniela danced around the room, humming to herself and holding her arms above her like a ballerina while she twirled in circles. Daddies are pretty amazing, Alana agreed. She flipped the pancakes onto the serving plate and set it on the table. Sit down, Munchkin. Breakfast is ready. Goody. Daniela pranced over and sat at her spot at the table. With chocolate chips? Yes, with chocolate chips. Because today is special. Alana set one on the plate in front of Daniela and poured a little syrup over it. The doorbell rang and Daniela jumped off her chair. Daddy! Alana nudged her back to the chair and touched her own bedhead in exasperation. She hadn't taken time to run a comb through it yet. It can't be him. It's too early. Eat your breakfast. She couldn't imagine, though, who else would be at her door at this hour. She set the syrup on the table and moved to answer it, hoping she didn't have any mascara smeared under her eyes. When she opened the door, she was surprised to find that it was Kyle after all. "You're really early," she said. He grinned, giving her the once-over. "And I'm glad I am. You look adorable in those pajamas." Alana tugged her fluffy white robe closer around her, covering up as much of the SpongeBob pajamas as she could. They were a Christmas gift from Daniela. Greg helped her pick them out. Sounds about right. Kyle stepped into the room and into her space, sliding his hand behind her neck and pulling her close for an intense, if brief, kiss. When he released her, she pulled back, her head spinning slightly from the contact. "Why did you do that?" His lips curved as he watched her. "You teased me into it with your messy hair and rumpled pajamas. I could never resist you when you looked rumpled. It happens so rarely." She blinked in surprise. "I'm not very rumpled." Kyle kissed her again. "Have you eaten yet? Or can I take you girls out?" "I'm cooking breakfast." She moved toward the kitchen, remembering her griddle was hot and empty. Plus, she didn't know what to do with Kyle when he slid into her personal space. Her heart still pounded from the quick hello, and she worried for a moment that Daniela had seen the kiss. Confusion about her parents was the last thing she needed right now. Alana found Daniela's plate drowning in syrup, and drips of it on the table from where she'd spilled when she poured more, apparently unhappy with the amount Alana had allotted her. "Honey, you aren't supposed to pour the syrup yourself." "I'm a big girl," Daniela protested. Then her eyes lit up and she grinned hugely, throwing herself from her chair and into Kyle's welcoming arms. "Daddy Kyle, you're here already. I told Mommy we should be ready to go soon." "You were right." He shifted her to his side and peered at the plate. "Is that a chocolate chip pancake I see?" "Yes, they're my favorite." He poked her in the belly, making her laugh. "What a coincidence. Mine too. Do you think your mom would mind if I joined you for breakfast, Princess Ella?" "You should eat with us. Can he, Mom?" Alana looked over at the hopeful smiles on Daniela's and Kyle's faces, as if she could say no. "You might as well join us." She stirred the pancake batter to make the chocolate chips rise into it and poured some onto the griddle. "You're very kind," Kyle said. "Really? And here I thought I was being railroaded." "I'm happy to railroad you any time." He reached past her into the cupboard for another plate and glass, and his nearness made her shiver. There was the problem, she thought. She was afraid she would have a hard time holding back if he tried.
The day was terrific and exhausting all at once. Kyle set out to buy all new furniture in Denver and arranged for delivery at each store. Alana helped him pick out lamps, dishes, and linens, and they bought everything she thought he would need for basic foods and cleaning supplies. His SUV was full to bursting when they stopped at one last furniture place. Princess Ella was long since tired out from looking for the perfect bed. When she climbed out of the vehicle, she whined her way into Kyle's arms so she wouldn't have to walk. They did the rounds of the store, ending in the children's department, and there it was, the bed of Daniela's dreams. It was shaped like Cinderella's carriage, with white metal rails arching above it and more swirling below mattress level like wheels. It had a filmy curtain that could surround it like mosquito netting and was piled with lavender bedding and plump throw pillows. Daniela was in heaven. Alana saw the price tag and nearly swallowed her tongue. "You might want to think about this one," she said to Kyle. He looked at the price and grimaced. "Well, I do owe her for 7 years of presents." "You've got to be kidding me." Alana lifted her brows at him. Kyle nudged her and gestured to where Daniela lay on the bed, giggling in glee. "Look at her. See how happy it makes her? How can I say no? You're going to spoil her rotten, and she'll never want to sleep at my place again." Alana knew the excitement would wear off eventually, and Daniela would be fine in her own bed, but she resented that she'd had to scrimp and save for years, trying to stay solvent, and he was blowing money right and left, as if he hadn't a care in the world. The fact that he would have paid child support if she'd asked for it didn't lessen her resentment. He slid an arm around her waist and leaned in to whisper in her ear. If you give me another chance, maybe I can spoil you both rotten. Kyle, Alana protested as she moved away from his touch before Daniela could see it, but she felt herself weakening. She loved him, but she didn't trust him not to break her heart again. It was tempting to give in, though, after spending the day shopping, laughing, and just plain being together. She hadn't expected this shopping expedition to weaken her resolve so much. Then she mentally rolled her eyes. Of course, she had known better. Every time she spoke with him lately, it got harder to hold back even a little part of herself. She wasn't ready to give up, though. No pressure, I promise. But Kyle's eyes indicated his intention to keep the reminders coming. I guess I ought to go pay for this baby. Yay! Daniela called out. He paused to caution her. Now, Princess Ella, they may not have one in stock. It could be a while before we get it, okay? Okay, can I sleep at your place as soon as you have it? Daniela bounced some more and clasped her hands together in glee. That's up to your mom. He tapped Daniela on the nose. She's still the boss of you. Daniela turned up hope-filled eyes to Alana. Can I, Mommy, please? We'll have to wait and see. Her daughter pouted. That almost always means no. And pouting gets you what you want? Alana asked. Daniela rolled her eyes and touched a loving hand to the bars arching above her. At least I'll be able to visit the bed. Until your father decides he isn't suited for settling down after all. But Alana didn't say it aloud. There was no point upsetting everyone, and she was starting to think that maybe he was serious about staying.
Daniela was asleep in the back seat when they arrived home, and Kyle carried her to her room. This is becoming a habit, he whispered as Alana pulled off their daughter's shoes. At least it's not a school night. She felt like a bad mom for not keeping her daughter on a regular schedule, but it wasn't like they'd ever have a day like this again. She pulled the blankets up around Daniela's shoulders and pressed a kiss to her forehead. Kyle did likewise and followed her out, shutting the door most of the way. She sleeps like a rock. Yeah, well, wait until she pukes in her sleep and wakes up with it dried all over her blankets when she's at your place. You'll love it. Alana pulled off her jacket. I can't wait. One corner of his mouth tipped up. You think it's funny now? She playfully bumped his arm with her fist. He snatched her wrist and pulled it to his chest. I think it's funny you give me these dire warnings, but you aren't really grumbling. In fact, he slid his other hand around her waist and pulled her close. I'd bet you don't really mind most of the mom duties, even puke cleanup. You just love being a mom. She smiled despite herself, both at his insight and the feel of him as she leaned against his chest. Guilty as charged. How can I not like it with that sweetheart in there? She's hardly ever in a bad mood. True. He bent his head and kissed her, something his eyes had been telling her he'd wanted to do again all day, though he'd abstained since the kiss hello. She was grateful for his self-restraint in front of Daniela. Alana melted against him, remembering why she used to love kissing him so much. He kept things slow, taking his time. When he finally pulled away, she found her hands fisted in his jacket lapels and had to make an effort to let go. You were always good at that. His lips curved. I remember it the other way around, and you seem to be better than ever. Should I be jealous? Not likely. Though she'd been on dates, there hadn't been anyone of note since him, so there hadn't been much practice in the past few years. Alana stepped away before she could be tempted to initiate another kiss. You should go. Kyle slid his hands into his coat pockets and studied her for a moment. You still think I will, don't you? What? Her head still wasn't completely clear. Go. You don't think I'm going to stick around. You think this is a game to me or something, but it's not. I'm not going to be sorry for the experiences I've had, but leaving you, not working on us, that was a mistake I'm not going to make again. I'm in it for the long haul, Anna. She watched him for a long moment. I think I'm starting to believe you. Good. I'll pick you up for dinner at Dad's tomorrow. Okay. The thought made her stomach tremble. They hadn't come out publicly about Daniela, and though she figured her brother had his suspicions, especially after the birthday party a couple of weeks earlier, this would be their first time in public, all together, even if it was just family.
11. Over the next few weeks, Kyle managed to insinuate himself ever more into Alana and Ella's lives. He smiled with satisfaction when he thought of the way Alana's walls were crumbling. Victory was almost in reach, and he had every intention of bringing both of his girls home to live under his roof eventually. His first sleepover with Ella was scheduled for Friday night after he finished shooting the high school softball tournament, and he looked forward to time alone with her. It was still hard to believe sometimes that Alana was moving toward forgiving him and taking another chance with him. He didn't deserve it, but he would do everything he could to prove that her trust wasn't misplaced. Kyle whistled as he adjusted the contrast on a photo of two kids riding bicycles. He'd like more children, especially if they were as terrific as Daniela. He might want to build on an addition to the house, something beyond the living room with more space for kids. And maybe they could add a waterfall that emptied into a moat ending at a koi pond, something they could enjoy in the evenings while sitting on the back porch. He had lots of plans for the future, and all of them centered on staying right where he was. Then the call came. The call he'd been waiting and hoping and dreaming of for years. Kyle, this is Sam Samuelson with Sports Illustrated. We have a last-minute opening for the Summer Olympics in London. I know you've been applying for years, and we're really happy with the work you did for us last winter. You game? Kyle's heart started to beat rapid fire and excitement flowed into him. He glanced at Alana's desk and saw her sitting there, her face serious as she spoke on the phone and typed at the same time. His heart dropped. Oh man, you have no idea how much I want to say yes. There was a short pause. Funny, that doesn't sound like a yes. No, it doesn't. He slumped into his seat. I've got commitments here in Colorado, a new job, a new home. A woman with whom he was finally making headway. This could easily be a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, Kyle. Don't be stupid. Grab it. Kyle couldn't take his eyes off of Alana. She glanced up as if sensing his stare and smiled before returning her gaze to the computer monitor. He wanted the job more than any he'd ever taken. Surely she would understand. I'll have to see if I can juggle a few things. You're working at some little paper in a podunk town. It's not like it's the LA Times or Chicago Tribune. We only need you for a month or less. Dude, think it over. I'll be in touch again in a day or two. There was a click on the line. Swallowing hard, Kyle put away his cell phone. A few months ago, he wouldn't have said he'd think about it. He would have rearranged his world to be there, but he had a lot more to consider now. He straightened in his seat and focused again on work. He'd have to figure out how to bring it up with Alana, but she couldn't possibly fault him for wanting the job. The Olympics in his old stomping grounds. What could be sweeter? He checked his watch. First things first. He stood from his desk and headed down the aisle. A minute later, he knocked on Doug's office doorway. The editor looked up. Kyle, come in. How are things going? Sit down. Kyle shut the door and took the chair across the desk. He clasped his hands in front of him. I have an issue I need to discuss with you. Is something wrong? Doug set his arms on the desktop and clasped his hands together. What can I do for you? Kyle sucked in a breath and plunged ahead.
Did you hear about the hotel developer? Bob asked as he cornered Alana in the break room. She and Kyle had been keeping things low-key at work, though she was starting to think that was a mistake since Bob still hadn't given up. George DiCarlo? Yeah, the news of his death came through the wire a few days ago. I've been in touch with Ballman, and I have an interview scheduled with him tomorrow. It was news in their county, since DiCarlo hotels would bring a major influx of tourists and enrich the city coffers, not to mention decimating the area's unemployment rolls. Always a plus. But did you hear about the reading of the will? It just came through the wire. All of his daughters are going to be running the place. Alana's head swiveled in Bob's direction. He only has two, and they announced months ago that the younger one was going to take over as hotel manager. She'd thought the move gutsy, since Lantana DiCarlo was the same age as herself, very young for the position. She couldn't even fathom running a resort that size. No, Bob was almost gleeful. He has 7 daughters. 5 are illegitimate, but they're all moving in together and taking over. Alana's head reeled. The gossip rags would have a field day, and though she'd handle it a lot more tastefully, it would add an interesting spin to the article she was going to write. Questions for Blake circled in her mind. Interesting. I hadn't heard about it. I've been out all morning talking to district officials about the flooding at the middle school. I'll do some digging. Thanks for the heads up. No problem. He set a hand on her forearm. You know, I wondered if you might join me for dinner Friday night. There's a place I've been meaning to try. She pulled her arm away. I'm sorry, I can't. Look, I'm seeing someone. She was going to leave it there. But word was starting to get out, so she decided she might as well be straight with him. Kyle, actually. Bob looked confused and a little revolted. But your brother and sister. Step-siblings, she corrected. And we didn't grow up together. He lived in England 350-some-odd days a year. Bob turned away, grabbed his lunch from the table, and took off. Doug entered the room as Bob left it and grinned at Alana. Your family must be so proud of Kyle. What a prestigious honor. He fed a few coins into the soda machine and pushed the Pepsi button. Of course, we've always been proud of him. Alana racked her brain for what Doug was talking about. Has he gotten some Associated Press award or something? Doug chuckled. I'm talking about the job shooting for the Olympics this summer. His expression turned wary as he realized she didn't know. Oh no, he hadn't told you yet. Don't tell him I spoiled his announcement. I thought he would have told everyone by now. He's already made arrangements to leave. He's leaving us again. Already? Alana felt her skin grow cold and her stomach tied in knots. We've been pretty busy, I guess. We haven't had a chance to talk. She swallowed hard. That's quite an honor. I know he's always wanted to shoot the Olympics. But in her head, all she could think was that he hadn't lasted 2 months living in Juniper Ridge. Never mind a whole year. She'd known he'd never last. How could she have fooled herself? He's one for secrets, isn't he? Doug chortled. But you can't keep a good man down. Though she knew it was only one job, Alana saw it as the beginning of something more. She swallowed back her tears. Right. A bird has to fly. She forced a smile as she took her lunch out of the microwave and strode to her desk, willing herself not to cry. Unable to face work again yet, she set down her food and headed for the parking lot. She needed some fresh air. The sky was clear and the last of the snow had melted away in the recent rainstorm. Daffodils and tulips had been popping up in people's gardens, and spring was well underway. Before she knew it, the summer tourists would arrive to play golf and ride mountain bikes, and Kyle would be back in England, leaving her here again. Alana walked to the back of the parking lot, letting the spring breeze cool her cheeks, and wiped at the tears that fell despite her best efforts. Disappointment crashed over her like ocean waves. She'd let herself believe in him again, and once again he had let her down, only this time it was worse because Daniela was involved. When she had herself back under control, Alana returned to her desk. She had too much to do that afternoon to let her personal life interfere, but it was all she could do to keep her attention on the monitor, and she knew this wouldn't be her best work. When she met Kyle's gaze later that afternoon, she could see the guilt in his eyes. Or maybe she saw it because she thought it should be there. He was probably so excited about the job that he didn't have room to think about how it would affect her and Daniela. 12. As Alana got Daniela ready for bed, she was tired from holding her emotions in check all day. In another 20 minutes, she could be alone. Then there would be time to release her pent-up emotions. She was blow-drying Daniela's hair when she thought she heard something. "Mommy, someone's at the door," Daniela said. Alana turned off the blow-dryer and set it down. "I think you might be right. It's Daddy Kyle." Daniela ran for the front door. Alana felt dread tighten in her gut. Her daughter was probably on the mark. Kyle had been stopping by most evenings to say goodnight and tuck in their daughter. The door was already open when Alana reached it, and Kyle scooped Daniela in his arms, listening to her chatter. "Hey," Kyle said and reached for Alana's hand. She pretended not to see his move as she shifted out of range. "How are you tonight? Working late again?" "Not this time." His voice was careful now. "Has it been a rough day?" "No, everything's fine." Alana started straightening the living room. "I told Daniela she could read a couple chapters from the story she brought home from school, so feel free." She headed for the kitchen without meeting his gaze once. "All right." His voice rose at the end, making the word a question. They disappeared into Daniela's room. Alana pulled out ingredients and began chopping celery for the crock pot she would turn on before leaving for work in the morning. She found chopping vegetables could be very therapeutic. Kyle came into the room a while later when there was a growing mound of carrots accompanying the onion and celery slices she'd already prepared. "Planning to feed a third-world nation?" he asked carefully. She realized how big the pile was and returned the uncut carrots to the bag. There was far too much for a dinner for only her and Daniela. Leftovers could be good too, though. "I got carried away." Care to tell me what's wrong?" Alana turned to look at him, leaned her hip against the counter, and folded her arms over her chest. "I understand. Congratulations are in order." His mouth moved, and from the look on his face, he was thinking of several creative swear words, but he didn't say anything for a few seconds. "I'm sorry. I wanted to tell you myself." "Yeah? When?" He tipped his head. "Why do you think I came over tonight? Just to hear more about Junie B. Jones running Speedy Quick?" Alana fought to keep her tears at bay and her voice even, but it came out tight. "I thought you were putting your daughter first. You couldn't stick it out a full year, though, could you? What's it been, 6 weeks? 7? And how long have you known about this?" "I got the call this morning. It's not like I've been holding out on you." Kyle's mouth formed a tight line for several seconds, and she could see he was as angry as she was. Though she felt a little better that he hadn't been holding the secret for several days, as she'd thought when Doug had mentioned the job, she was still hurt that he hadn't told her first. That's something, anyway. "This is the Olympics, Anna. I may never get another chance at this. Sam said he only needs me for a few weeks, a month at most, and Doug is going to let me take a leave of absence. I'm coming right back here afterward. And how long before you get another plum offer and leave again?" Her stomach churned at the thought. He let out a frustrated huff. "This is different." "Yeah, they're all different, aren't they? Every assignment is special." When he didn't respond, she pushed him some more. "I thought we were getting somewhere with our relationship. I thought that at least you would discuss it with me before you took another assignment abroad." "I had planned to discuss it." She sent him a disbelieving glare. "But you went ahead and made arrangements at work without talking to me first, didn't you? What would be the point of discussing it with you if I didn't make sure first that I would have a job to return to? I had to know if I could make it work before I brought it up with you. But you plan to go, don't you? Even if I ask you not to." Her tears had escaped by now and streamed down her face, though she managed to keep from sobbing aloud. "I haven't even told him yes. I told him I had to see if I could work things out first." Kyle reached for her, but she jerked out of the way. "So if I ask you to stay, you will?" Alana waited several seconds and saw him fist his hands by his side. She nodded. "Your silence is eloquent." "Fine." He spoke through a clenched jaw. "If that's what you need so I can prove you're more important to me than my job, then I'll call Sam tomorrow and tell him no. I had hoped you could bring Daniela and we could see a couple of events together, but if you don't want me to go—" His face twisted with pain. "If I have to pass this up to prove to you how important you and Daniela are to me, I'll stay." After waiting for a long moment for a response, he turned and headed for the door. She circled the counter and watched him snatch up his coat. When the door slammed behind him, Alana's brain finally kicked back in. All of her anger evaporated as she realized what he had said, and that he meant it. She rushed out the door into the cool May night. His hand was already on the car's door handle when she managed to get a word out. "Wait." He froze and slowly turned toward her. "What?" Alana hurried over and lifted a hand to his cheek, searching his eyes in the dim light of the street lamp. "You would really give it up for me? Just because I asked you to?" She shivered from the cold. Kyle's eyes closed as he leaned his forehead against hers. He slid a hand onto her hip. "I'd do anything for you, Anna. You're so much more important than any job." Hope clogged her throat. "Really?" She'd never had anyone put her first. Even the Olympics? He lifted his coat from where it hung on his arm and slid it around her shoulders, then his lips closed over hers and he pulled her against him, wrapping her in his embrace. "Giving up a job, even the Olympics, is nothing compared to losing you." Alana buried her face in his neck, letting the tears of wonder and worry fall. How could she help but love him when he would give up a huge dream for her? When she finished, she kissed him again. I think I'd like to see London, and maybe the gymnastics competition if we can still wrangle tickets. Kyle's face filled with both joy and uncertainty. So you wouldn't mind if I took the job? She took a moment to search inside herself before answering, wanting to be sure her words were true. Asking you to give up the parts of your job that you love the most would be like asking you to give up what makes you, you. I love the adventurer, the traveler, as much as I love the rest of you. I wouldn't want you to travel a lot. I like having you home too much. But for really special assignments, I think we might be able to make arrangements, one way or another. For short trips. Relief filled his eyes, and he squeezed her tight. I really do want you to come for the games, even if it's just part of the time, he said. Alana slid her arms around his neck. Daniela and I wouldn't miss it for the world. Alana pulled her jacket closer around her in the cool June evening. Kyle gave her hand a squeeze as they turned a corner and the Thames came into view, and beyond it, Big Ben and the Palace of Westminster. He pulled her close, wrapping an arm around her shoulder as they strolled toward the riverbank. It's beautiful. I was starting to think I'd never make it here someday, Alana said. The past 6 weeks had been hectic as they anxiously waited for Daniela's passport to come through while preparing for the trip to England for the Olympics. Kyle had been there for 2 weeks already, but Alana and Daniela had only arrived the previous afternoon and were set to see the gymnastics event the next day. Daniela was fast asleep at her grandmother's house, so the couple was enjoying a few uninterrupted hours. I'm glad I could be the one to share it with you. It's been good to be back, Kyle said. Don't tell me you want to make this your home base instead of Colorado, she teased. The past weeks since she had started really releasing her fears had been wonderful, full of discovery and fun. She still struggled with niggling doubts, but every day Kyle showed that he was going to be there for her, that she and Daniela could count on him. She was looking ahead to the future. No, it's great to visit, but I want to be closer to Dad. We've had so little time to get to know each other, and I always loved Juniper Ridge. His gaze went soft as he looked at her. And that's where your roots are. We'll get out and see the world, but you'll be happiest with that as your home base. Warm tingles erupted in her chest when he said things like that, putting their futures in line together with her needs counting in the mix. You keep saying we. She kept her tone light, but wanted something more from him. He'd been hinting at more, but hadn't said it plainly yet. You have other ideas? He asked. A man rode by on a bicycle, narrowly missing them as they approached the stone railing and looked across the river. Lights bounced off the water, glittering like 1,000 stars on the undulating current. She missed the thick canopy of stars at home, but it wasn't a bad trade for a visit. She shrugged, sending him a sideways glance. A smile teased his lips, and he turned to lean back against the rail, pulling her close. I couldn't wait to bring you here. To share one of the places that brings up memories for me as warm as our glade in the forest. She felt her face heat slightly at the reference to the place where he'd first kissed her all those years ago. They'd taken Daniela there for a picnic as soon as school had gotten out, and he'd kissed Alana long and deep in that same glade that had started it all, the sensations strengthened by the memories of before. I like the idea of sharing your special places. I thought maybe I could make it special for you too. He pulled her even closer and pressed a lingering kiss to her mouth. I never dreamed being with you again could be this good, that I could feel so complete. But being part of yours and Daniela's lives fills all of the empty holes in my heart. I wake up every day knowing that my life is better and that I'm the luckiest man alive to have you in it. Tears sprang to her eyes, but before she could say anything, he brought a blue jeweler's box out of his pocket and presented it to her. When he flipped the top open, her eyes nearly fell out of their sockets. She'd hoped for a proposal this week, but she hadn't anticipated such an amazing ring. The round diamond, which had to be pushing 2 carats, caught the nearby lamplight, dazzling her. Tiny flowers and leaves etched into the band whirled around small colored stones. Will you marry me, Alana? Make me the happiest man in the world? She let out the breath she'd been holding, and tears swam again, filling her vision. I don't know. Are you going to build that moat you promised me and complete our castle? Prosedmersudiwe, she asked, needing a humorous moment in order to get her emotions back under control. I have Vince working on it as we speak. He pulled the ring out of the box, worry coming to his eyes for the first time that night. No castle is complete without a queen. Unable to hold back any longer, she grinned, warmth filling her chest. Yes, I'll marry you. She lifted her hand so he could slide the ring home, where he belonged.
Thanks for listening to Homecoming, a Love in Juniper Ridge sweet, small-town romance novella. Please like this story to help others find it, and subscribe to be notified when I post other sweet romance or romantic suspense stories. Hope to see you soon.